I'll call to order the regular session of the City Council of Atascadero meeting here, and I will lead us in a pledge to the flag. So please stand as you are able. Pledge allegiance to the flag of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Borbo.
Here.
Councilmember Daris.
Here.
Councilmember Funk.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Here.
Mayor Moreno.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Well, if you are attending in person, we welcome you. And if you are on our webinar here in Zoom, welcome as well. If you're on the phone in the webinar, if you're watching on channel 20, you're listening on KPRL, any of the above, we welcome you tonight. And if you would like to speak during community forum or during any of the public comment time frames during any, you can do so in a couple of ways. If you're on the webinar, you'll be able to raise your hand. Obviously, in here in person, you'll come to the dais. But if you're out there and you want to call in, you can do so at the following number. And by the way, this is also on the agenda, which you can find at atascadero.org and find the City Council agenda. So the number is 669-900-6833. Once again, that's 669-900-6833. And then the meeting ID is 889-2347. 9018. And I will repeat that meeting ID is 889-2347-9018. And when you do call, please let us know which item it is that you would like to speak on. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Also move.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Borbo and a second by Councilmember Funk. We will waive the reading in full of all ordinances appearing on this agenda, and the titles of the ordinances will be read aloud by the city clerk at the first reading after the motion and before the city council votes. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Borbo.
Yes.
Councilmember Funk.
Yes.
Councilmember Daris.
Yes.
Councilmember Newsom. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom, sorry.
That's all right. We'll move on to our consent calendar. This contains items that are considered to be routine and non-controversial by city staff. And motion unless there is a member of the council or public wishing to pull an item. So I will look to, I'm seeing Councilmember Daris.
Yes, if we could pull item 4 just to pull separately, because that's the one that I had the conflict on.
Yes, good call. So we'll
Thank you.
pull out item 4. Any other?
Yes, I wanted to pull item A5, animal shelter, I'm sorry, is that A? Yeah, A5.
A5. All right. So we pulled 4 and 5. Any members of the public wishing to pull an item? If you're in the Zoom webinar, you can raise your hand. Anyone here in public? I'm not seeing anyone. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and if I could have a motion on items 1 through 3.
I'll move approval of items A1, A2, A3.
I have a motion by Councilmember Borbo, a second by Mayor Pro Tem Newsom on A1, 2, and 3. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Borbo.
Yes.
Councilmember Daris.
Yes.
Councilmember Funk. Yes. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And if we could get a motion on A4.
I'll move approval of A4.
Councilmember Borbo.
Yes.
Councilmember Funk. Yes. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. All right. So A5, Councilmember
Hey,
Borbo.
yes, I just had a question for staff and for the public, Councilmember Daris, Mayor Moreno, myself went to the grand opening of the new animal control or animal shelter in San Luis Obispo. Very nice new facility. But this item for us is our contract with the county to pay for animal control services. And the question I had for staff, because this is a very expensive item, is that it mentions in here that I mean, this was an issue for us in the past of allowances for the cities to have some of their own procedures. You know, it mentions in here that we have to adopt ordinances in conformity with the county, but there is some room for latitude, and we had some discussions about that. What's the status of that in terms of when that might come before us? And I assume the county is still open to that.
The county is still open to that, and we are just beginning negotiations or discussions regarding the county's ordinance. County Animal Services is under the County Health Department, and the County Health Department has been a little bit sidetracked due to COVID the last couple of years. So they're just starting to pick that up. Laura, do you have anything else we might add? We're probably expecting something sometime in the next 6 months. Would that be correct?
Yeah, they're really hoping to get that going sooner, but with the shelter opening, the transition from that, it's been another delay in getting that forward. And last I talked to Dr. Anderson, he was hoping we would resume talking about it in October. So I'm sure once it goes through that, it definitely won't be till next year.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
If I could ask then, since we're on ordinance that we've talked about in the past, that sounds a little funny, the cat ordinance, but yes, the cat ordinance in terms of the cat colonies and that type of thing. So we have something that we've been wanting to do as a city, but my understanding is that has to kind of go in concert with what we're doing with what the county is doing. So it's something we looked at a couple of years ago, but where does that sit?
I will let Laura answer that one, as she is our cat expert.
So several years, I think 2019 is when we talked about it. And so when we talked about it, then is when I started working on it, started partnering, working with stakeholders. I've been in the process of trying to get some of those conversations going again, just so that they can look at what we have, how we can better partner with that. All of that will be ready to go when the county's ready to go. So we'll bring it at the same time. And a lot of that is because we will have to be adopting the counties along with ours. And so rather than trying to piecemeal in the CAT with what we have, the TNR program with what we have, and then re-adopt it all over again when we do the new, we're combining them together. So hopefully again, in the next 6 months, we'll have all of that as one package deal for the council.
Okay. Thank you. Any council comments or questions on this item? No. Since we have been talking about this now, I want to open that up to the public. If there's any member of the public wishing to speak on this item 25, go ahead and come forward to the dais or raise your hand in the webinar. Seeing none, go ahead and close public comment, and I'll ask for a motion.
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
Motion by Councilmember Funk, second by Mayor Pro Tem Newsom. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Funk,
Yes.
Councilmember Warbo,
Yes.
Councilmember Daris,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom,
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We're on to updates from the city manager, Ms. Rickard.
Thank you, Mayor. Wanted first on a couple of events that we had that busy weekend of September 16th and 17th. The first is Atascadero Cleanup Day. This was a huge success, as always. Thank you to the many volunteers that make this day possible. So on Saturday, September 17th, we had over 35 wonderful volunteers that came out to assist with our annual Creek Cleanup Day. We also want to thank Atascadero Waste Alternatives, Chicago Grade Landfill, and of course the Atascadero Mutual Water Company and the Groundwater Program all come together to make this day possible. So this is a huge effort. It removes literally tons of litter and debris from our creek and our riverbed, makes a big difference overall in water quality, aesthetics, and just preserving our natural environment. So thank you to everybody who takes the time to participate every year. Also want to talk about another event on the 16th and 17th. And that was our annual cornhole tournament. We had a total of 120 participants, or 60 teams that played in the 6th annual Showdown Cornhole Tournament. And we want to thank Michael Piccolo with the Knights of Columbus for bringing back this family event to the city each year. We also need to thank Kiwanis and Mark for his wonderful hamburgers. But it was a great event. Participants attended from all over San Luis Obispo County, as well as from the Bay Area and Central Valley, and over $4,000 was raised that will benefit North County Adaptive Sports and Recreation Program and Escuela del Rio. So thank you to Kiwanis, the Boy Scouts, Troop 51 for their assistance with the event, to Medina Light Show and Designs, and Deja Vu Band for performing. And mark your calendars for next year. the 7th annual Atascadero Showdown on October 13th and 14th. So we'll be moved into an October, but it's a great event and it's a lot of fun for people of all abilities. So, great. We also have some new upcoming events. We have, well, not our hometown favorite, our Colony Days celebration. So the annual Atascadero Colony Days celebration will be held this coming Saturday at October 1st, on October 1st, beginning at 10 a.m. It will kick off with the parade at 10 a.m. that will run down El Camino Real from Davis Auto Body to West Mall and Palma Avenue by the Sunken Gardens. So first of all, come join us. If you're not joining us, please remember that El Camino will be closed for the parade. So plan ahead and plan accordingly. It's an amazing parade, a lot of fun. It's great to see all the entries. City Council will be joining along with fire and police. The festival will start immediately following the parade and will continue until 3 p.m. with a variety of vendors, entertainment, live music, and lots of great food to enjoy. And that'll all be in and around the Sunken Gardens. The Wiener Dog and small dog races begin at noon, along with a pet costume too. That's always a fun fan favorite. That is a fundraiser for the Heilman Dog Park. So that'll be good. At 12:30 p.m., the Colony Days Awards will be announced and performances. So Colony Days is brought to you by the Atascadero Colony Days Committee, and we thank the committee and their volunteers for the hard work that goes into putting on this event each year. For more information, visit www.colonydays.org. And if you want to get involved, I know they're always looking for more volunteers. So also visit that website so that we can make sure this wonderful tradition continues on and you can be a part of it too. So that would be wonderful. We also have coming up a national night out planned for the Sunken Gardens. This is going to be on Tuesday, October 4th from 5 to 7 p.m. in the Sunken Gardens. And come enjoy a safe and fun evening to meet the officers of Atascadero Police and Fire and other public safety partners. This annual event provides an opportunity to learn about safety tips and enjoy a variety of exhibitions. There will be refreshments available from Starbucks, Slodo. We appreciate their participation along with the Atascadero Police Association, Home Depot, and Medina Light Show Designs. And if you have any questions, please contact our community service officer, Lauren Purify, or Sergeant Kelly Metz at 805-461-5051. And we have Fall First Friday concert series. So this is exciting and new. On Friday, October 7th from 5 to 7 p.m. At the Plaza, one right next to La Plaza, right there on El Camino Real. The new Fall First Fridays concert will be taking place with the DV8D band. DV8D band. Sorry, that's hard to say 5 times fast. Get your dancing shoes on and enjoy the 80s era of rock and wave dance music covering your favorite hits. And bring your wallet, as there'll be entertainment with the Bounce House from Bubble Fun 101, Slow Axe Company for axe throwing, and delicious concert fare will be available for purchase with options including Taqueria Don Jose, Paradise Shaved Ice, Lulu Cheese Girl, LOL Yogurt, and Tent City Brewing. So they'll all be there or close by. And this new fall concert series couldn't happen without our fantastic sponsors. So thank you as always to Grigor and Alice Jones, Medica Financial, Waste Management, Union and Vine Restaurant, Bubble Fun 101, Rolson Music and Sound, All Signs and Graphics, and Annie Wilson Graphics. And for more information on these or any other events in the city of Atascadero, go to visitatascadero.com. And with that, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. I did want to mention that what else took place on September 16th was the 4th night of Dancing with Our Stars. And so our very own Dr. Steve Robinson, who danced for Friends of the Charles Paddock Zoo, he came in 2nd place, which means not that he's the best dancer, but of course he is an amazing dancer, but well, he might disagree with that. But he was he was such a good sport, and his willingness to participate and put so much time and effort into that. Second place, which it all comes down to fundraising. So raised over $50,000 for Friends of the Charles Paddock Zoo to help with exhibits and the education programs and things that they do. And he also took People's Choice 2 nights. And so that was really exciting. And so congratulations to him, and many thanks for what he was, for his time and efforts. Any questions from council? No? All right. So thank you very much for the report. We'll move on to community forum. This is the portion of our meeting that is reserved for persons wishing to speak on it, speak to the city council on something that is not on the agenda tonight, but over which we do have jurisdiction. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and we allot a total of 30 minutes, up to 30 minutes for community forum. Any items that are brought forward tonight don't become a subject of conversation at council, but sometimes we can triage and make sure answers do come your way. So if you have something to say, we do have somebody here who will come up to the lectern, and then anyone else who is in the webinar, you can go and use that little icon at the bottom and raise your hand. And when you do speak, we ask that you would provide your name for the record. And with that, welcome to our first speaker.
Good evening. My name is Sierra Steele. I've been here maybe once, twice. Primarily tonight, I came on a different topic, but I did just want to touch on something the city manager spoke of, the creek cleanup day. As someone who regularly uses our orange bag program and helps clean up trash as a healthy release of anger, I just want to thank everyone for helping with that. And every little bit matters. And I really appreciate people taking action rather than pointing fingers and blaming other people. So with that being said, I would like to convey to our management that allowing proper funding for our employees and our programs down to the bottom level to include supplying the orange bags and not in telling our employees that they're too costly to use and not refilling them on a regular basis, or it's not the case. We have people hand trimming bushes here at the city building. There's no reason that they cannot pick up the trash from the collection point. We need to reevaluate the priorities when it comes to the beautification of downtown. However, I would like to address on the Del Rio project specifically. I'm not exactly sure how to specifically say it is just the Del Rio project, as Clint Pierce of Madonna Enterprises is also doing not only the Valley Fresh project, a 2.5 acre parcel near my home, a 2.5 acre parcel with 6 homes with ADUs, over $1 million within 1,000 feet of my home to Taco Bell, a gas station. This is all the same individual applying under different metrics. We have no impact study of my neighborhood. We went ahead, voted under the guise of a new freeway overpass and an additional turn lane. However, we did not take the steps right. And before things move forward, we need to get this under control so buildings can be built and we can build a community that actually functions. And I need to be heard, and I need to be able to have conversations with the people in the city and with Clint Pierce of Madonna Enterprises to make this project work for Atascadero. And thank you. That's all I have for this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Steele. Let's see there. I don't see anyone else here in the chambers. I will go to the webinar.
I come back for the last 30 seconds.
You know what? Why don't you go right ahead?
It's kind of just with the ADUs.
About 30 seconds.
Yes. Okay. Approving a building tall 30 feet from my bedroom window, while a few months later passing ADU regulations to prevent people from overlooking your backyard and preventing me from being able to add additional ADUs to my property while allowing this hotel is just kind of madness with the same.
Thank you, Ms. Steele. All right, I'm looking to the webinar and I do see we have some attendees. Is there anyone wishing to speak? If so, please go ahead and raise your hand now. Do not wait. All right, I'm seeing nobody raise the hand, so I'm going to go ahead and close community forum and bring it back to council and staff. So first of all, thank you so much for being part of that cleanup. We greatly appreciate it. And staff, I would just ask that if there is an issue with the orange bags and cleanup, that we make sure that things are working smoothly. And with regards to there's Del Rio is a bigger conversation, but in the end, we have a property that has particular entitlements, and this council was very cautious when we did that to do what we could to protect the neighboring property owners. So what ended up being approved was actually less intrusive than it could have been under what was already entitled. So I would ask staff, I believe an EIR, an environmental review, was done originally. Could you just briefly speak to that?
And Phil, you can help me here. There was an environmental review report that was completed for both the majority of the property on the former Walmart site,
Yes.
that Del Rio Marketplace site, and the Home to Suites site. So there was one environmental impact report that covered all of those. There are some additional commercial properties in the area that were not part of that EIR. They do have the right to develop without an EIR based on our general plan. They were assumed that. So the properties where the Taco Bell will be, where the gas station will be, and the property immediately north of the original Del Rio Marketplace were all commercial by right, and no formal EIR report was done on them. However, they did have to meet CEQA and an in-house environmental review.
That's exactly correct. One more distinction, just based on the public comment, I'd like to clarify is that all of these projects are not under one developer. The fuel station, if that moves forward, and they are in construction permit review now, is owned not by Madonna Enterprises or Flint Pierce, and is being developed separately by an independent service station developer. And that's the only difference. But yeah, all those properties were assumed to be developed in that same fashion under the 2002 general plan and its environmental impact report that was prepared for that general plan at that time.
Thank you for that information. And any members of the public who are wishing to speak to staff, we are always available to answer questions. So thank you for that. Can't mute myself there. We're going to move on to our next item. So let's see, it is 6:23, but public community forum will remain open until 6:47. So if there's a member of the public who ends up coming into the chambers or is on the webinar and you realize in the next 20 minutes that you did want to speak, go ahead and raise your hand and we will get to you at the next earliest opportunity, which will be after our next item. So let's see, we have no public hearings tonight, so we will move on to our one management report, which is Objective Design Standards Project Update. And this will be our Community Development Director, Mr. Phil Dunsmore, and our Senior Planner, Kelly Gleason.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council. And we're also going to introduce in just a moment here our consultant with MIG, Genevieve Sharrow, who's been working with us on this project. And what I'll tell you first off is there's a lot here in the report you've given me tonight. There's all kinds of different design ideas. And what I'll tell you to make it easier is there are several things in this report that ultimately will not be part of the objective design standards that we need to narrow down, but we have to have them in there as part of this bigger discussion to give you a complete picture. So in essence, we're throwing a lot at the wall tonight with the hopes of getting somewhere, and that somewhere is us being able to have the instructions to be able to bring back an ordinance amendment to this city council that adopts a set of design standards that can give surety to both the development community and to staff, and to give us a little bit of streamlining while at the same time have us comply with the Housing Accountability Act for these more by right projects that are coming our way. But with that, I'd like to introduce Genevieve. She's going to give you a great presentation on the ins and outs and these details, and then we're going to summarize it with this great whiteboard that we have that can really go through each of those points, and then we can decide what, what main components should be in these objective design standards and what components might be best left for a larger study like a zoning update or a general plan update. Hi, Genevieve.
Good evening, Phil, Mayor, Council, and members of the public. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm going to share my screen here. Let me make sure I can do that. Let's see.
And while she's getting that ready, she's going to give the majority of this presentation, but I'm also going to jump in to give you some real world comparisons about what's happening in each of these topic areas in the city right now with current development and give you some scenarios as well. So I might chime in here and there and be available for questions at the end as well.
Great. Thank you for that, Phil. So the presentation that we have for you tonight is structured to provide an overview of kind of the whole development rather than sometimes we've stopped and talked in between. This one, we'd like to get through all the topics of conversation and then come back to each one independently. And you'll see as we go through the process, they all weave together, all the different components of design, they really do weave together. So we'd like to kind of give you the overview all at once and then take the time to go back and ask questions on each individual component. So just to start though, we'll summarize what we've heard to date, and then we'd like to focus on some critical components of what good site design and building design are. So the project overview, apologies. There we go. So objective design standards is the intent of the project here tonight. And these are the standards that can be quantified and measured. So state law, as Phil mentioned, is really leading jurisdictions towards these types of standards that streamline the approval of projects, but also really remove the subjectivity, the back and forth between applicants and decision makers, and ultimately are intended to reduce the discretion in the decision-making process. So several state laws rely upon these objective standards as a way. Is the Housing Accountability Act, which states that a city can't deny a project or reduce its density or otherwise make it infeasible if the project complies with objective standards. So if a city doesn't have those objective standards, it's kind of forced into approving the project unless the project design creates some kind of big health and safety issue. So the city can continue to make suggestions using subjective criteria, but it really is hamstrung to approve the project, even if the applicant refuses to make any changes. SB 35 is another law where projects meeting certain requirements are eligible for streamlined ministerial review. And here again, the project must meet objective planning standards at the time of that application. So many of these laws coming through are very similar in that they're linked to this objective design and development standard. And historically, of course, cities have used both those subjective and objective criteria to evaluate projects. So when we say subjective, we're really referring to guidelines that say should, or other general design ideas that are intended to guide an applicant toward a particular type or style or preferred outcome. So in the past, in Atascadero, historically, a project goes through DRC or has a CUP with conditions that gets the project to the desired design. But with these new changes to state law, that subjective kind of, we know a good project when we see it process is getting phased out. So instead, these objective design standards need to be relied upon. And so objective standards should be read without resulting in two different people reading them in a different way. So they should be really specific and clear, ultimately very, very clear. That's not to say that there can't be choice. So there can be a menu of options by which an applicant can meet specific standards. The objective design standards would apply in all the city zones that allow multifamily residential or mixed use, as shown on this map. So what we've heard today, last year we talked to council members and key users of the zoning ordinance to understand what are the key issues that should really frame the process and get our mindset and our lenses set for the objective design standards. We were really talking about what is that design character that wants to be fostered in Atascadero. And based on that input and drawing from some of the housing element work, the consultant team and staff identified 6 key project goals. And then just a couple months ago, we spoke with council about those and refined those down to 5 key goals. The first of which is eclectic. Atascadero has an eclectic nature in a very positive way. A pitfall with objective design standards can be to force projects into a standard mold. And given the existing nature of architecture in Atascadero, we really want to allow for that personality and differentiation in architecture. Flexibility is another feature. And this is linked to the outcome of being eclectic. And this will be implemented through the standards being written in a way that a standard is presented, but a variety of different options could be used to meet that standard. Pedestrian vitality is also a key goal that we heard. And our design standards should really place a key focus on entryways where that pedestrian orientation, that interface with the public realm or the sidewalk really happens. Transitions was another really important project. As change happens, it's really important to consider neighbors and surrounding properties. How that graceful transition can occur, especially between single family neighborhoods and more dense neighborhoods, or more dense neighborhoods, or any neighborhoods and commercial areas. The final project goal is to encourage high quality outdoor gathering spaces. Outdoor open space really provides so many opportunities and is part of the joy of Atascadero. We also heard that the city's major corridors and perhaps even particular nodes along El Camino or Highway 41 or downtown might benefit from some extra unique attention that might differ from other areas of the city. So there's several high-level design elements that are really the foundation of site planning and site design that we'd like to discuss with you tonight. The building blocks of site design cumulatively prescribe that box or envelope within which development can occur on any given site. And as I said earlier, these components all work together, and there's trade-offs. When one of the factors increases, often another one has to decrease. So the key site design considerations that kind of build that envelope are height, building location, or how far a building must be set back from the property line, also called a setback, unit size, which equates to the bulk and mass of a building, also contributes. How many parking spaces are required and where? That constrains the envelope. And how much open space is required and where is the other feature. And I'd like to go through what's currently required for each of these aspects. And then we want to check in with you tonight to gauge your support on certain questions that we have about modifications to these. And the intent here, again, is to build for us that box within which we're going to plan for these objective standards so that we can develop appropriate standards for that box. And we can really think carefully about what that is. And while we have a lot of specific questions for you, as you saw in the staff report, some of these you might identify to be larger than the scope of this objective design standards and want to kick that over to the general plan process. And we're happy to say that we don't need to think about that tonight, and we can work within the more constrained box. So let's start off with open space. The current zoning code standards for open space require all residential projects with 4 or more units to provide 300 square feet of open space per unit. Smaller projects between 4 and 7 units can choose whether to provide that as what's called private open space, or a deck, or a really large balcony, or a fenced-in yard, or to provide it as what's called common open space, which would be accessible to multiple different residential units. Currently, mixed-use projects do not have a clear stated requirement for open space. Projects that are...
Just point out one thing on, sorry, Genevieve, on this one. on page 77 of your staff report, I did notice today that there is a typo on page 77 where the word private should actually be common in reference to the 1,000 square foot of open space. So that may have confused a lot of you. Sorry about that. We just noticed that today. Hopefully this presentation will clarify that as well. And as soon as Genevieve is done with this, I also wanted to chime in a little bit about open space in general and how that's working.
I feel there are a number of occurrences of private and open and private and common in that paragraph. Could you just read how it's supposed to read? What are the, if that's the first like couple of bullets up there on 77?
So the chart you see up there is correct. And so if I look at the staff report, let's see.
I think it's the top of page 77, where
Yeah.
it says projects with 4 to 7 units require open spaces provided at a ratio of 300 square feet per unit. It can either be common or private. And then it says any private open space must be a minimum of 1,000 square feet.
And that really should be
And
common.
that should be common,
Any common open space must
Yeah.
be a minimum of 1,000.
which is what
feet.
you have now
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for
And
the
just-
clarification.
Yeah,
And
while I
just
am
to-
speaking, oh, go ahead.
Go
Go ahead,
ahead.
Genevieve.
Sorry, Phil, go ahead.
Let me just want to say one thing while I have the floor anyway, is that the reason open space is an issue today, why are these standards working? Why are they not working? What's really happening is in a smaller project, it is very difficult to fit in any common open space. It becomes an afterthought. The common open space ends up being a drainage area or part of the parking lot or something that just doesn't really function. And so it might be something to think about. It's really key to have a little more definitive parameters or delete the requirement for certain projects when they're below a certain threshold or within a distance of a park. The other missing fact is we have none of these standards that apply to a commercial district where you've got residential built above commercial. So just a couple points to think about on this topic. Go ahead, Genevieve. I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah, so just to clarify again, in the residential zones, this is the standard that exists, 4 to 7 units, 300 square feet. You can provide it as a private or a common open space. Once you hit the threshold of 8 units, though, it does need to be provided as a common open space. Certainly, a developer could provide private open space in addition, but that would be hard to also fit within the so that's the current requirement. So we've got a few thoughts and questions around that. We know we'll need to develop some standards for mixed use development because those don't exist. In addition, we wanted to ask for some feedback on how to think about open space, what kind of council's key considerations are when we think about these kind of nuances of open space standards. In particular, for the requirement of right now, we have 300 square feet of open space. Should open space requirements be different for smaller projects? Should that number decrease or increase for different types of greater emphasis on the common open space versus private open space in keeping with the current standard that we have? Is that threshold right for 8 units to have common open space? Should active recreation areas be emphasized over passive areas in larger projects? Should we make sure that there's some amenities that are associated if it's over a certain size threshold? Project type, I think we kind of intuitively know, but want to ask the question, should there be different types of standards for different product types? Certainly mixed use is different from a townhome style development. Should we have different standards for those? An apartment style project might have a different feel than a townhome or a cottage unit as well. So we wanted to get your feedback on those pieces. With regard to project location, should a residential apartment or a condo in a commercial zone be a different product with reduced outdoor space? Often mixed use development space, which is often met through a combination of balconies and common open spaces. Should projects adjacent to existing parks have reduced requirements? Should there be different standards for different zones? For instance, lower density areas have a different look and feel. And with regard to design flexibility, should we create standards this kind of lumps in, it's kind of an end question once we've decided all the other things. Should we allow for that flexibility with all projects being able to do either common or private open space, or combining them to meet objectives? And should these standards vary based on project size, design type, or location? Here's an interesting question too about indoor spaces. So a lot of common newer styled apartment buildings these days are having indoor open spaces, recreation rooms, you know, an indoor pool, I guess, but it's usually a gym or even common gathering areas. Some have kind of like a co-working space and things like that. Should those types of common spaces that are indoors count towards common open space requirements? These are an amenity, and wanted to get your feedback on that. Should we develop specific maximum ratios if you think that that is a good idea for these types of spaces? Should we, in other words, not allow 100% of the open space to be met that way, but maybe some of it? And even further, if we do that, should the ratios be different based on project type or location? Maybe it's okay in a mixed use zone, or in the commercial zones in a mixed use product, but maybe it doesn't feel as appropriate in an apartment project where more outdoor opportunities might be desirable. So we'll come back and discuss open space in detail as a group. The next site planning topic is parking. And in the staff report, there's a number of questions that we'd like to ask about parking. And, you know, we recognize that Atascadero has unique topography and various, you know, lack of transit and more rural nature that makes parking a very carefully considered component, but it remains one of those key features that builds that development envelope. The Atascadero zoning ordinance sets minimum parking requirements by the number of bedrooms, and these standards are required to be met for both multifamily and mixed-use development. The one caveat is that currently parking for retail uses is not required in the DC, DO, and the DO zoning districts. So hotels, residential, those still have to provide parking, but retail restaurants, they don't. Parking location and type can have a really significant impact on site design. And we did a little case study here to show kind of on a standard sized lot, what different configurations yielded in terms of the percentage of the site devoted to asphalt, housing, and open space, because these three really work together. In the first example, these are kind of traditional standalone cottage garages attached to each kind of cottage standalone development, or like a planned unit development here. And here, 30% of the site's used for parking. All of the open space is kind of pushed to the fringe of the property and becomes not very usable. In the second example, the open space is slightly more usable, with a concentration around a center courtyard for more shared space, which is desirable. However, we found that given the tricky design needs with an interior lot, the density is decreased. However, for a corner lot where vehicle access could be along the long side of a parcel, you could definitely see the options for a superior design approach here, where you get more housing, more parking, and more open space, kind of more of everything in certain parcels. Also, this configuration does deter redevelopment of existing garages into accessory dwelling units, which is a concern that was raised in the past. Tuck under parking in the third option is really the most efficient in the case study that we completed. More density, less asphalt, and kind of a consolidated open space. One consideration, as Phil mentioned, is that sometimes that space also has to accommodate stormwater detention and could become less usable than desired. Phil, did you want to jump in on anything before I show a few examples of different sites of designs?
I just want, thank you. Yes, Genevieve. I do want to mention one thing here, and this may not be about changing our parking standards in terms of number of parking spaces per unit or whether parking is required or not for, residential uses in a commercial zone, because that might be a bigger discussion left for a larger platform. But it's more about the design of parking, where parking could be located, whether, it should be visible and towards the front of the site, should it be at the rear of the site, should it be on the side? And that is exactly what these exhibits sort of display, different types of configurations. And that's one area where design standards can really play a big role in helping create overall good package of design.
So I'll scroll through some examples of designs that don't present that parking front and center. And in some cases, they do a good job of consolidating parking to allow for more open space or more density. This example here is from San Luis Obispo with an alley incorporated into the design. It really keeps that street kind of aesthetic with a slightly higher density. This example also from San Luis Obispo incorporates tuck under parking to achieve that higher density and continues to orient the pedestrian entrance to the front in the public realm and really have a kind of more small scale at the entrance level. In this example from Azusa, consolidated parking resulted in an area that could be reserved for an active play area. And this example in Rancho Cucamonga, you can see the areas along the edge of the property are reserved for open parking, which allows for a quite significant consolidated open space area and a pool. So as a best practice, we would recommend drafting the standards to specify location and design of parking areas to ensure that quality and aesthetics and also meet emergency access needs while enhancing open space opportunities. Revisions to parking requirements might also support higher quality site design and allow for more high quality community oriented design. So in particular, we know that parking in the front of the building really upsets the pedestrian experience and the look of the building. We feel pretty confident in making some standards that are focused on that. But there's some more nuanced questions that we had about what about corner lots? Are there any circumstances where requiring parking behind or under buildings shouldn't be the case, or the requirement should go away? Should we consider any reductions to parking for residential projects? Maybe in the downtown. Currently the DC and DO zoning districts don't require parking for retail. Commercial patrons find parking. Maybe small residential developments could consider this. But again, this can be a conversation that can be had anywhere along the line. These were kind of the questions that were coming up as we were trying to build that. What is the small development going to look like in downtown so that we can then build those objective standards? And it looks different if it's providing parking on site or if it's not. Do we want to incentivize consolidated parking and discourage those private garages? We could design to encourage or require those things. This could make certain building types precluded though, like a townhome style development. So, but maybe there's certain places in town where we are okay with that. Thinking long-term in the future, as property values go up and surface lots no longer really become the product type that's being developed in downtown, a residential development could provide an in lieu fee to the city to help fund future parking garages, things like that. So those are kind of long-term thoughts that we don't necessarily have to answer tonight, certainly. But are there other smaller minor nuances like affecting the guest parking requirements that we should know that you're thinking about changing or not, so that we can really understand what that development envelope is? The next component of site design is building height. Currently, most housing in town is limited to 35 feet. And the DC zoning districts downtown, the height is limited to 45 feet and 3 stories. So an important consideration when we're thinking about building height is the use. In general, residential uses fit really well into 10 feet floor to floor, but commercial, not so much, especially commercial ground floor uses or retail use really wants more like a 15-foot floor to ceiling height. Some chain franchises are even looking for even higher than that. And that really helps make for a viable commercial space that is easily leasable and, you know, is a fun and great space to be within. So, Phil, did you want to add anything there before I went into some questions?
Yes, thank you. What did I want to say here? Building height is a big topic, and I don't think what we're saying here is that this is the time to significantly alter building height universally. I think what we're saying here is, should we change the way we measure height and eliminate the stories requirement? That's really the biggest thing, and that's already here in our slide. And I think an overall height consideration might be something that we'd want to steer towards the general plan, but in terms of definitely ensuring that we have ample space for a variety of commercial uses on ground floor, very critical. And should we be measuring by stories, or does that really even matter? It's another critical point.
Yeah, and I'll jump on that too with regard to the story height limit question. There is a program in the housing element that I remember that did call the city to take away the 3-story requirement and really just look at measuring in terms of height. So we would recommend that we move forward with that recommendation. It makes it easier for development to work within it. And the critical feature really is the number of feet rather than the number of stories. Should we also require a 15-foot first story for new commercial or mixed-use buildings? And as Phil mentioned, you know, this might be a topic for the long term, but should we consider some other nuances that would allow projections beyond existing height limits? For example, the La Plaza building has some features that are over the 45-foot height limit and required a planning commission use permit. Are there features that you'd like to kind of know that those already exist and don't need to go through a conditional use permit process, or are you comfortable with the process as it exists today? Are there any considerations with regard to the height and how buildings are potentially set back at upper stories? Should we think about, as building heights increase, setting back the upper stories? Should we also consider other areas of town that you'd like to consider greater height? And certainly this feels like a general plan conversation. With regard to unit size, this can play into site design and the available envelope for development. So here's another little case study of how the current standards work. So under the current zoning standards, 4 3-bedroom units could be constructed on kind of an average lot in a 2-story configuration, and 11 parking spaces are required. So you see that the parking fits, the open space fits, and 4 units, these are 4 3-bedroom units, fit essentially in 2 stories. A 3rd story wouldn't really work under the current conditions because the required parking couldn't be met. The area of space for parking remains the same, but you need to fit in 17 spaces instead of 11, and it doesn't quite fit. However, a smaller unit, like a 1-bedroom unit, you know, it fits into the mass, the bulk better, and in general requires a little less parking. So here, less parking would be required for 8 1-bedroom units than the 6 3-bedroom units, but it still wouldn't quite fit. But 6 1-bedroom units would fit in this scenario, and still in the 2 stories. So there's a few different considerations. We've heard in the past that council would like to encourage some smaller unit sizes to occur. There's kind of 2 ways to think about that. If we want to require it, are there certain areas of town where we want to require a maximum unit size not to exceed, or an average maximum unit size over the whole development. So some, if the maximum is 1,000 square feet, some units can be 1,500, some can be 500, but we need to meet in the middle at 1,000. So that's an option to consider that we'd like to hear from you, your thoughts on. There's also some ways to incentivize or potentially incentivize, or we hope that it would incentivize. There's no guarantee with incentives, right? The carrots might not always be eaten by the rabbits, but fractional density is a way that incentivizes smaller unit sizes by providing additional capacity on each site. Now, as a smaller unit could be considered half a unit if it was, say, 500 square feet, or a studio. A 750 square foot unit could be counted as 2/3 of a unit, and so on. So as we think about these options, of course, that parking consideration in the previous graphic does come into play to make these an available incentive that is truly meaningful. And as with all of the questions, there can be nuances with which these standards are applied, either in multifamily zones or just at certain nodes or the length of major corridors. We can tailor these designs locationally as well.
If I can, let me just weigh in on that unit size item. And the question is, why would we go there? Why would we have any of these standards? The problem we're seeing today is in our high density multifamily district, we allow 24 units per acre. In our low density multifamily district, we allow 10 per acre. In the high density district, we almost never see 24 units per the acre. And this is because we're seeing larger units that sell for a higher price. We're seeing 2,000 square foot units and are not able to fit the units on there with the parking and the open space. So they build fewer units, and then we don't meet our housing element goals. So it's the whole thing is tied into affordability, but it's also tied into design. And if we had average maximums, let's say you had an average maximum of 1,000 or 1,200, which would allow for 1,500, 1,600 square foot units, but it would incentivize smaller. Then we might get there to really achieving our housing element policy by really maximizing the infill potential, and then coming up with creative, within a moderate range, 1,500, 1,200, maybe some 700s in there, to really get what your multifamily zone is designed for. As it is now, we're just about out of high density multifamily land in our city. And what that's doing, it's forcing pressure to develop multifamily units in our commercial districts or in other districts where that may not be as suitable. So it's something to think about for bigger picture, but parts of this discussion are certainly suited for the general plan discussion, but parts of it do tie back to these design standards, and that's why we're introducing this now.
And I think this is the final piece of site design, thinking about how far back a building is required to be set back from the property line. Currently, the standards in Atascadero are, both the front property line, so that's the one nearest to the sidewalk, the rear, which is the backyard, and the sides are delineated. So we know kind of the basic ground floor envelope within which we're working. So our question is, should we consider setbacks that correspond to building height so that, for instance, taller buildings, especially when they're adjacent to lower density, that's really our concern there, should those be set back at upper stories as the height increases? And it doesn't necessarily have to be done in a wedding cake style, but there's a lot of different ways that can be met with daylight planes or other features. But should we consider that as an approach to address that transition zone between lower density and higher density uses? Any thoughts there, Phil, before we dig into building design?
No, I was going to let that one go.
Great.
We'll talk about it later.
So that's really that box within which we're working. So then we get to what do we put on the box? What is, what's the, some people say gingerbread that goes onto the box and designs the building. And nearly or just as important as site design is building design. And there's a lot of features that come into play. We've discussed for the most part already massing and orientation, parking and open space, but there's other critical features, including facade design, plane changes, roof design, even something as little as where you put your trash can be really important. So massing and orientation, of course, are key components to appropriate transition, especially between different zoning districts. And these features also impact shade and light, privacy considerations, and really are kind of the foundation of a building's aesthetics. The massing and orientation features that are kind of most important to us as we think about objective standards are where are we looking for considerations for privacy and overlook? So, you know, perhaps roof decks and balconies and considerations there, transitioned height and setbacks at residential zones, upper story setbacks. And these details can be included in a menu from which a developer could choose different ways to meet the intent of really providing that transitional space. Parking design, as we discussed, we'd like to include information in the objective design standards really about location, where those parking lots are located on a particular lot, but also considering shade on a larger lot, and materials and buffers. With regard to landscaping and open space, we talked about these quite a bit, but digging in a little bit more about where on a site it's allowed, the different types of materials and amenities that can really make that open space more usable. Is it important to the council that that open space in certain locations along nodes and corridors could be more public, not just a common open space for the residents, but also kind of spill over into the public realm? Is that an option that you'd like to consider? With regard to facade, this is really where a design can fall apart or do great things, of course, as well. But really that articulation, setbacks, cutouts, a requirement to make something not be one blank building becomes really important. Patterns and architectural features also come to play here. Regression features and extrusions. There was a study done in Portland that surveyed a group of lay people about building design. And they found, interestingly, that one of the key features that made people feel like a building had good design was the degree to which it had shadow within its that is linked to its articulation. So that could be in the form of window recesses or other types of, you know, we see a lot of shadows happening here that really come into play with us feeling like it's good design. So these features become really important in our standards and can play out through patterns throughout the building and build that cohesion. Materials, these are very important. There might be a few materials that we want to just outright prohibit. It becomes really difficult to regulate like the type of materials in general, or particular colors, for instance, but we can set a standard about having multiple different materials, multiple different colors to provide that visual interest and texture to the building. Transparency, windows, fenestration are really important. And these standards differ for residential and non-residential. Certainly a ground floor residential unit is probably going to have some different window standards than a ground floor retail use. But we really want to stimulate curiosity and kind of visual interest in either consideration. Entryways, as we mentioned, are a really critical component, how the building interfaces with its pedestrian entrance to the building from the sidewalk or the public realm. And this will consider for residential uses, thinking about how a stoop or a porch or a patio is designed, as well as walls and fences will be important. In a mixed use development, it's different. Entryways are also critically important, but the different types of entryways are designed very, very differently. And the types of entryways and the specific standards of those entryways can be listed, and a developer can choose whichever entryway type they'd like to implement. Roof forms are not directly related to architectural style, but really help to often define an architectural style and can be an objective standard. We don't always regulate roof forms. This is kind of a question for council. I don't know that we necessarily put this in the standards without, unless you have a clear kind of thought that you'd like to see roof forms addressed in our objective design standards. And as I mentioned, trash, mailboxes, fences, we often don't think about them early enough in the process, in the planning process, and then they kind of get plunked down in maybe not the best location. So we'd like to include these in the objective design standards to kind of move that up in the design process. So Phil, did you want to mention anything else about design before I talk about how this might develop into a document?
No, go ahead, proceed. Thank you.
Great. So the objective standards, there are already a lot of objective standards in the city's code. We went through a bunch of them, 300 square feet of open space, X number of parking spaces. And the objective standards that we write, we need to kind of weave them into the existing code. So there's some changes that might take place kind of fluttering throughout the code to either clarify existing standards or add more objectivity there. And then we also see kind of a new section that will address all of these other new features of objective design. And again, here we hope that there can be a menu of items for to provide some more variety on ways to meet specific standards. And we anticipate having varied standards for different product types. So a low scale and a moderate scale tend to have different design characteristics. And so we'll have different standards for those different types. And as we heard, a particular node specific design requirements might be necessary. So we might present a couple of ideas for those nodes. So that is a lot of information, but I have one of my handy digital whiteboards that I'd love to go through some of those questions. Some of the questions, if we don't want to talk about tonight, Madam Mayor, we can cross those off, but some of the other ones where we can get a little bit more nuanced direction to help us write those standards, we'd appreciate.
Thank you, Genevieve and Director. Genevieve, when you started out, did you say that you wanted to, now that you went through this, take this section by section for the 6 different items?
Yes, if
Okay.
that's okay.
I think that's great. So what I noticed, Director, you said it a few times, is that there are some of these things, this is a lot more than what we probably want to deal with here tonight. So there are things that as we're doing our general plan update that will probably be best suited for that project. And so I would just ask that here tonight, we be cognizant of that. And if we start kind of going into that, maybe Director, if you could just flag us and say, hey, remember, Mayor, Council, you asked me to
Yes.
pull you back so that we save that for the appropriate time and focus in on the objective design standards that we want to put forward prior to that coming forward. So let's start with the if we're good going in order, starting with open space.
We have a template already for you. We can go ahead and.
Hold on one moment. Say that again, please.
Sorry, we have a template already for you that we can go through here on the screen.
Oh, isn't that lovely? All right.
Yes.
So Councilmember Funk has a general question before we get going.
Sure. As I've been contemplating this this pack, and we got quite a packet on this in advance. Very helpful. But could you put back up on this slide the map area the map that we're looking at? Because when we're looking at potential issues, I find myself wanting to know what is next to this property and how much slope do we have? So because those are, often very different around town. So if we could just kind of look through what's in this map, and is there, in what areas of this do we have topography that is has enough slope that slope would be a consideration? Are there any? Most of this is fairly flat. And
Most
which
of our-
area? Yeah, and then we'll look through in terms of which areas have something other than single family residential abutting them.
Most of our multifamily is in zones that are flatter, not all of it. In fact, there's very few properties in Atascadero that are generally flat. Even some of our multifamily zones have slope, and even some of our commercial zones do. But for the most part, as you can see, they're centered around El Camino Real and parts of Morro Road. A lot of them do back up to single family, and a lot of the commercial is adjacent to these multifamily zones. And there's even some adjacent to industrial, as you see out on the map out that follows out Traffic Way out that particular area. So it's a bit of a mixture, but for the most part, slope is not a significant factor. When we think of slope, it's primarily all in our single family districts is where we have the most significant slope. Although we do have areas that are about 10% slope, which is, it's buildable. It's not excessive. We had a very interesting downtown project this past year called The Block. And that's probably the most sloped commercial property we have in our city. And it's right next to multifamily, but they were still able to creatively figure out a design. Of course, took a lot of grading, but they were still able to step it into that hillside and create something out of it. But it is certainly a consideration.
Okay. And then it looks like that as you look at this, most of these areas appear to be the backside of it will be residential, except unless you're in the section that is between El Camino Real and the freeway. Then those sections have El Camino Real, and almost all of this will have a frontage onto either El Camino Real or the 41 or Traffic Way, it looks like. So something fairly substantial as a frontage. Okay, thank you. That helps me think about what the criteria can be.
Sure thing. I was wondering as we were going through this, we're saying we're getting away from subjective, we're moving towards objective. And in theory, that sounds like a good thing. But then we often know that the minute you define something and say, this is it, then suddenly you have something that deviates from that might be more ideal, but now you can't do it because it doesn't meet the objective design standards or whatever the ordinance may be. Now, what I'm wondering, and I'm thinking that this would be the case, if somebody comes forward with a project that doesn't check all the right boxes, but checks other boxes, and in balance is actually a project that we would really want, how would that proceed forward? Would they have to go through more of a discretionary review? Would it be a CUP? How would that come forward if it didn't check all the right boxes?
Exactly. So there's two different ways that can occur. One would be through essentially an exception process, conditional use permit, which is where most of our multifamily projects today go through anyway. The idea is that the state's going to eliminate that option for us in the future, or is doing that now, and our current housing element does that now as well, is it basically requires these by right projects. So that's one box. The other factor here is, I think what we're suggesting with these objective standards is that you have a menu approach, so that you've got flexibility. Like, let's say you've got 10 items and a residential project might need to select 6 or whatever the number is. I'm just throwing out a random number, but several of these items. And that way because each site has different characteristics, not all of those factors might work, but these 4 factors might work out of that menu. So the menu approach really helps that as well.
So but the menu approach seems to be more in number 6, the building design with all of the different
But
things.
it could
Are you
also
saying-
include any of these features.
Could
It could
include-
also be spread throughout the guidelines in terms of meeting objective design standards.
And so that's something as we're looking through this tonight, clearly, the 5 of us, well, with the exception of maybe one, really wouldn't be well suited to lay out exactly what that would look like. But if we said, hey, we want flexibility, that's something that you and Kelly and Genevieve would be able to bring back and say, hey, here are the kinds of options within the parameters that you council have given to us. Okay.
Yes.
If
And
I
I
can
think-
comment on that also, because listening to this presentation, which is really good, by the way, thank you. My concern is the requirements causing the design to be designed from the outside in, and that's not good. At least I don't think it's good. Form follows function. If there's a good balance, then I think it works. I mean, I like the menu option, but I think if it gets too strict, then we're designing for the exterior and trying to make the inside work for it. And I think that's going to really make it difficult and create some undesirable places possibly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I could follow on to your comment, if I understand our whole exercise tonight, though, is, we're establishing objective design standards that, according to the state's rules, if you meet these, we have to give you, the go-ahead. You proceed. So if we want, the flexibility would come in, and yes, if you want to do something other than, what we list in these objective design standards, we can give you an exception.
We can give you a conditional use permit process, an
Right, either
exception.
a CUP process or some other process that says, hey, okay, I can't, or I don't want to meet this, and here's why, I think this is a good option.
Mhm.
We could, through the CUP process, simply say, yes,
Yes.
that's cool.
And
And
keep
we
in
might
mind-
even want to,
Oh, go
if I
ahead.
might, we might even want to craft that a little bit more carefully, instead of just saying this can go through the CUP process, but also say, the project couldn't meet the objective design standards, but we're not punting them to a variance because they can't meet the variance findings. But we are going to add a different finding that says that, they're providing a superior design to what would ordinarily be allowed. So
But
kind of putting in something there.
Genevieve, I think
Mhm.
what you've told us time and again is that superior design is subjective.
So that's only in this other path, right? This is another path. If you comply with the objective standards, it has to be approved. If you don't want to comply with this, you can have another discretionary path.
Right, so the discretionary path, what you're saying is then quality design, we could then maybe go through an AUP process rather than CUP. So we're still helping with what the state wants in terms of streamlining and not, of course, not costing the developer or project owner as much time and money.
And I think that's important in our city because we have a lot of unusual lot shapes, sizes, slopes, this, that, and the other things, so that we set out these objective design standards. It says, if you meet these, proceed. But if, something's hindering that, you can come forward with an idea and the community development director can consider it through an AUP or through the CUP process. It can go to the planning commission. So
Yeah.
we're allowing an open, a door
Right.
that they can go
Right.
through. But
Yeah.
just
Okay.
keeping in mind, the entire premise of this is if you meet these standards, you can proceed.
Okay, so
Yes.
okay, you're the only one that hasn't spoken, then I'd like us to get on to the,
I know,
Thomas.
moving on. Phil, I know in the design review committee, we've been talking about objective design standards for about 4 years. I know originally when we started to talk about different nodes or different places throughout the community, are we looking at doing this at gateways, or is this a blanket objective all the way through the community, regardless of where it's located?
That is entirely up to the council this evening. And so you could choose specific locations and nodes, or you could say, this is going to apply wherever multifamily residential is allowed to be.
you're making this so easy, Phil.
Sorry.
All right. I'm going to ask our council, can we go on to the individual items?
One,
One more.
good. How does this interact with the process where the state is requiring, for multifamily now, we get waivers for all of these things. So if the project can't be done without it being 4 feet from the neighbors or whatever open space, that we are required to approve those waivers if they have for
Density
instance,
bonus.
Yeah, a
Yeah, the density bonus
earned
law
by a
does
affordable unit.
require, if they meet certain objectives, that they get to apply for certain concessions or waivers. One concession would be one development standard. One waiver might be, another development standard or requirement. So it wouldn't waive them out of this entirely. They would have to pick and choose which ones they don't want to do. For example, they could say, we want a parking reduction, we want a height increase, and we want a setback reduction. Those would be 3 different concessions, for example. And that's only for a project that meets the density bonus standards and affordability standards. Whereas these standards would apply to any project regardless of its affordability level or whether it's a density bonus project or not. But yes, you're right. That's a whole separate category and a whole separate discussion. But certainly there are projects that if they meet affordability standards and density bonus standards, that they're going to get to waive or refuse a few of these standards.
So they would get to waive up to 3 of these, or is it?
The number is dependent upon the affordable level of the project, and it varies by project.
Okay, so we have to
Affordability
allow
level.
that we can set these standards, but there will be people who get acceptance to them by the density bonus program.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm just going to say, I have to laugh at page 75 where it says if they meet the requirements and they're eligible for a streamlined ministerial review and make 50% at least of the proposed residential units as affordable, that all construction workers have to be employed using and being paid a prevailing wage to thereby make it more expensive. So anyway, just interesting. All right, moving on to open space. So Genevieve, a lot of words came out of your mouth as we went through the open space. And if you could help us, so I'm kind of seeing some questions here: project size, project type, project location. What else do we have under open space? Could you scroll down a little bit? Design
flexibility and indoor spaces.
Okay.
And the design flexibility that's a repetitive question after each one of these it's embedded there. But really, we're talking about size, type, location, and indoor spaces.
Okay. So as it relates to open space, what questions do we have right now?
Okay, so back to the first one.
Actually, I'm sorry, Genevieve. I'm asking council what questions they have.
My
So I
apologies.
see Councilmember Borbo.
Yeah, Genevieve, I had a question. What is private open space? I mean, is a balcony private open space, or is on the first floor is a little courtyard or enclosed patio open space? What is private open space in this context?
The definition is really that open space is really just for that one unit that it's attached to. So if it's ground floor, it should be fenced in and really associated just with one individual unit. It can be a balcony, it can be a deck, it can be a fenced in area, but it's really just accessed by that one unit.
Okay, but I mean, a deck or a patio would count as private open space.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom, followed by Councilmember Funk.
Can you define passive spaces?
Good question. So the existing open space or generally open space standards kind of just say, provide us open space, but they don't say what you put in it. So amenities that are added to make, especially in a larger development, like a playground or a pool, so a passive would not be that. Passive is, there's really nothing there, maybe a bench. Instead, having more an active recreation area should, if a project meets a certain threshold of size, like a pretty big project, do we want to require them to have a tot lot or a pool on site?
So an open grass area is considered passive, but if it has a playground in it, it's considered active.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Does a laundry room count as shared space?
It depends on how we define it. And that's why we have to be careful about how we define it. Yes.
I'm not going to go there. Okay. Continuing on to wonderful subjects, does the septic leach field count as open space? Actually, none of these places are going to be on septic. These are all going to be on sewer.
Hopefully
mind.
they're all beyond sewer, but if a septic leach field had an open space park playground on top of it, if we'd allow that, which I don't think it would, then it might count as open space. But I mean, no, let's just say no.
Let's not put the playground on top of the leach field. Okay. Thank you. That's enough.
Any of your questions? So this is a little bit of a strange thing right now, because I feel like we're going through this to see if we have questions, then we're going to go to public comment, then we need to come back and really discuss this. I don't want us to start making some decisions here until we do that. So I don't have any other questions,
Yes.
I don't think, with regards to open space. So why don't we move on to the next one, which I think was parking. You want to do it? Yep. You know what? That is a good point. Good point. Okay, so we'll go ahead and open it up to public comment with regards to open space. So if there's anybody on the webinar wishing to speak on this, go ahead and raise your hand. Don't be shy. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to council. Thank you. That was much easier. I don't know why I didn't think of that. Usually I do. All right, Charles. Let's see. So I think some of the things you said that I would, my assumption is that we could all get behind these would be, if you've got, if you have a project that's within a certain distance from a park, let's say, then we could certainly reduce those open space requirements, or, eliminate at least the outside ones altogether. But I'm trying to find some things that we could cling to and then see what the other things are. Because Genevieve, basically, I feel like there's this big, huge, massive stuff, and we're kind of trying to wrangle this without much. And I know you're trying, but without much guidance into like, what do you as an expert see? Like, hey, here are some ways to form this, because right now I'm looking at this and it's like everything's all over the board.
I thought though they just wanted us to go through each of these questions.
Yes,
It's
but I
just a lot
feel,
of questions.
I guess we
I feel
can.
like it's a lot of
We can
questions.
simply, it's a lot of questions, but I mean, is that what you want? You just want the five of us to go up or down on each of those? And so for each one of these, you're going to have a yay or nay?
I think so. That'll give us guidance to really tighten these up and bring it back to you.
And so you want, basically under project size, you want 15 votes. Are there 15 squares there? Is that what we're looking at?
These are for notes.
Oh, those are for notes.
Yes.
So I guess what I'm trying to ask Genevieve is, like, do you want the five of us to say on question one, all of us come to an agreement on yes or no? Or are you going to say the five of you, four of you this way, one of you that? What do you really want from us? I want to narrow us down quickly.
I would like direction on these questions so that I can have some clear guidance on what you'd like to see in the draft. So if I can hear a clear consensus from the group, I think I
Perfect.
can determine from that.
Perfect. Okay. So if we start with number one, should open space requirements be different for smaller versus larger projects? I'm just going to go left to my right, yay, nay. And if you have something that you need to ask or specific that needs to be said, then Genevieve will put that into her notes. So starting with Councilmember Darris.
I don't think it should be different.
I think it should be different in the sense that, you obviously can't put certain things in a very small project. So, there might be something you want to require in a large project, just wouldn't be feasible to require in a small one. So I guess I would say yes.
All right.
I mean, if I'm going to clarify, there was a formula that was provided in the presentation where you've got 300 square feet, per unit, or if you're gonna have a common space for everybody, it's a minimum of 1,300 square feet and so on. I mean, that, to me, that's not, you have one or the other, so you're treating them both the same. You're just picking one.
Well, that's in our current code, which is, Director, I don't know if you've got that page right now that has our current code for parking.
Is this,
I'm trying to
well,
find
what's
it.
up on the thing right now? This,
For open
Oh,
space.
she just brought it back up.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's it. And just a reminder, the problem that we're having today is that these smaller projects are not implementing any quality common open space. The private open space is typically okay, but when it comes to common, it's not really going to work unless you've got a project that's about at least over 10, maybe 20 units. Then you get enough common open space to make
okay.
it something reasonable. Otherwise, it just becomes this leftover area. So that's just really the main premise of this particular one.
Okay, well, with that in mind, then I would change my answer. I mean, if the smaller projects, there's a history of not working,
Correct.
having a common area.
Or is this even needed if there's a park right next door?
And so
That's
all
rare.
of these are
Well,
the kind
and-
of guidance, things we need guidance on.
The-
is
the
where
park-
we're
I'm trying to pull you
Yeah,
into
yeah.
this.
You are. Thank you.
And my comment with the park next door thing is what's next door? Is it a half a mile down the street? Is it literally right next door?
Probably a quarter mile would be a reasonable walking distance where you could take a child in a stroller.
Right. And my feeling is I mean, I wouldn't even consider it. To me, that's a totally separate thing. I'd rather not have that be a factor in whether or not you have common space. Again, I mean, I have to maybe think about it a little bit deeper, but that's how I feel about it now. If I had kids in an area where we were maybe, even a quarter mile away or half mile away, I probably we don't have time to go to the park, play outside in the driveway or something. I mean, it's just because it is a little bit of an inconvenience and it might not get, I mean, the park is nice to have, but I don't think it should be a factor in the actual development. Having a common space, whether it's private or common, right where you live is more homey than it is going down to the park. That's my feeling.
Okay, so let's get back up to number one. We've got, so two of you who then, as the director went through what he was talking about, that it probably does make sense that we have open space requirements be different for smaller versus larger projects. I would agree with that. Do we have a consensus on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
And so I think the next step of that question is, it seems like the current threshold isn't working. So if we increase that threshold to maybe more like the 10 or 12, but still, I guess then we move on to the second question. Do we want to make that emphasis continue to have that common open space? So right now we are requiring larger projects to do that.
Can
Say
I
that- say
ask
that
a
again.
question on this thing before we leave this section?
We're still on this section. Genevieve, could you ask that question again? I didn't understand what you were saying.
So right now, projects between 4 and 7 units can opt to do private or common open space. Phil mentioned that, projects between 8 and 10 or 8 and 12 are providing a common open space that's not really that functional. And that's the threshold right now. They have to provide a common open space. So does it make sense to switch that threshold up to say 10 or 12? And, but do we want to hold firm on above 12, making them provide that as common open space? So two questions.
So Genevieve, I don't think we want to get into that much detail tonight. I think when we hear from the director, this is the experience in our city, we can say, okay, we trust you to come back with something that represents us getting good, solid development with these objective design standards and doing something that's reasonable, what we think will work. So I don't want us here tonight to pick between 10 units or 12 units, but come back with that. Is that fair enough?
Absolutely.
Okay. And now, Councilmember Funk, is that the one that you wanted to talk on, or is it just the section of 1, 2, 3?
It's just the section 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
And the question is, what's the rationale behind 1,000 square feet being the minimum?
That's in the code today. I'm not
Right,
sure
but
what
what's the rationale behind it?
It's really just been generally an adequate space to really have an open space work effectively.
And is that common in other communities?
Might be average, yeah. They range around that
Okay.
size.
Thank you.
Sure thing. Good question. Could you move that bar? Okay, there we go. Should there be greater emphasis on common open space versus private open space for larger projects? I'll switch now right to left. Councilmember Funk.
Okay, and I think yes. And I think for larger projects, if you have quality open space, as opposed to just a big dirt lot, around the edges of the thing, there's a lot more value in that. So when we get down to flexibility, I'd give some of that. But I think requiring common open space for larger projects is essential.
You're yes on that. Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
This is kind of hard for me because I have children in the area. So some of us want a little bit more private open space as we get into larger buildings so that we can monitor our kids a little more. So I guess it really depends on the project, whether it's cost prohibitive to having it done. But I think open space varying between both common and private works.
I also say to me, that's a very much depending on what the project does, it will attract a certain, buyer or renter. I mean, most of these, if we're talking the larger ones, are probably going to be renters. So in terms of it being an objective design standard, I really could go either way. I'm not married to either.
Yeah, and I say no because I don't see why this is something we want to impose on the developer. It's more a matter of what fits the project. You have this standard of so many square feet per unit. Some of them might want to put it into more common open space. Some might not want because they're going to brag about their private patio or whatever with nice features. And so, I mean, I say that that's too much detail that we're imposing on the project. We should keep it simple.
Yeah, I would agree with what Charles just said. Putting emphasis on either one limits the design it depends on what the goal of the developer is. And like Charles says, you might have a complex that has really, really nice private patios or upper decks or whatever floor you happen to be on, or it might have a really nice common, what do they call it, clubhouse that is the key feature of the development. So I think putting an emphasis on either, I wouldn't agree with.
Okay.
May I add a comment?
Sure.
I think we should think about downtown differently than some of the other areas of town.
And I think we are going to get to that.
That's one of the
Yeah,
questions.
we'll get to that.
So my answer to this question would be different in downtown, where I think that private open space would be.
And that will be
sufficient.
that'd be a separate question. So should active recreation be emphasized over passive in larger projects? My answer to this, I'm gonna go first this time, would be similar to what council members Borbo and Dara's just said for the private versus kind of common open space. Is that, again, who knows what somebody wants? So requiring that you have playgrounds, how do you know that folks are going to want playgrounds? And again, maybe if that's what they're trying to attract, that's great. But us requiring that you have, active versus passive, because if you do that, you might actually preclude certain people that they would want to rent to. So I would be a no on that. And I'll go to Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
I think these are too restrictive. I think that you're asking us for a greater amount of detail and it's kind of on the spot. What does our community want? I mean, where is the feedback that's coming from that? I mean, we're making decisions based on projects and whether they fast track or if they got to go to a conditional use permit. I just don't think that I don't have the ability to answer some of these questions because it's a project by project.
Which I think your answer to that would be then, no, you wouldn't emphasize one or the other. You'd leave that open to the developer as long as they're meeting the overall open space requirement.
As long as anybody is meeting the standards set forth in our code, I think we have an existing code that addresses this, right?
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Borbo.
I agree. No, I say no for the same reasons I said on the other one. And I think you
articulated.
Okay, Councilmember Funk and then Daris.
Yeah, I can go with no on this one.
Yes, no, no, also, I don't think emphasis should be placed on either one.
Okay, thank you. All right, Genevieve, does that go good on project size?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so project type, should there be different standards for different product types? For an example, an apartment style project may need more of a common space focus, whereas townhomes or cottage units may utilize smaller yard areas or decks more effectively. I'll start with Councilmember Daris.
Yes.
This one I would agree with. I think that if you're going to put an emphasis on something, this is where you would do it. Apartment style projects would have more of a common space. I would, again, now getting to the emphasis of passive versus active, I wouldn't go there, but I think a common space that is universal is a good idea. And then townhomes is a different type of an animal. And I think a private area would be important.
I would tend to agree with that relative to, how you look at townhomes. But again, for me, I don't see the need to go to this level of detail. You establish the standard of so much per square feet of open space per unit and let them figure it out. And so my answer would be no.
Okay, I'm going to ask our director, do you see a benefit to adding that into the objective design standards?
No, that should be that can be an option. Projects vary so much.
Yeah.
And so I think that there may not be a benefit to that.
Okay, then I would say no as well. Mayor Pro Tem followed by Councilmember Funk.
I'm going to just go with the simple no.
I like the simple.
Yeah, I think no on this one. Let's leave the flexibility.
Okay, that's all right. We can be 4-1 on occasion. Not the end of the world. Okay, project location, should there be reduced requirements for residential in commercial zones? I'll start, I would say yes on that. Councilmember Borbo.
Yes, and this, hold on. Wait, are we on C1?
I can't read
We're
what's on there.
Yeah, and unfortunately that toolbar comes up. So we're on project location number 1. Should there be
Okay,
reduced
I'm
requirements?
following it on the
Yeah.
agenda. Yes, I think so. And again, this will relate to the discussion relative to downtown and absolutely should have a different standard there. And I also think it's not so much on the product, but the location is definitely, you should have a difference, but I would tend to say yes on this one.
Councilmember Daris.
Yes, most definitely there should be reduced requirements because there's going to be a lot more limitations, more difficult to achieve some of the things that you want to try to do in larger projects in a different area. So yes.
Councilmember Funk.
Agreed. I think that there should be different standards and notably for downtown, but also generally in commercial areas. So to allow to different experiences to be created.
And Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
There's only 5 thumbs.
She already
up,
put the thumbs up, so she's kind of guiding you in your choice.
Yes,
Take that off.
yes, whatever.
She's a yes. All right.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom, why don't you start us off with projects adjacent to existing parks? We already have I think I said a yes and Dara said a no. So where do you stand on that?
I'm going to say no.
Councilmember Funk.
I say yes.
And our tie.
I say yes. I mean, if we're building some multifamily across the street from Sunken Gardens or across the street from another park, I think we absolutely, especially in the downtown area, should allow a reduced open space requirement for that that development.
Well, and that was the reason why I asked the definition of adjacent. Again, if it's literally next door, then I think that's, I mean, if it's right across the street, I think that's different than even a quarter mile down the street because it's convenient. It's like walking to the other end of your complex where you live. So this is a yes or no, really. I mean, if it's literally next door, literally adjacent to it, then I think it has a different feel.
I'm going to add to this that you need to define adjacent because when you say that it's a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, you're a busy, commercial area, you're not going to be pushing your kids or taking them to that. You're going to want them to be close and at home and safe in a, existing, community park.
So I'll ask our director, is that something, do you have enough direction that as you're looking at this, you can say, hey, these areas, it could possibly be different zoning where, hey, in these areas, these are largely family, there's, Paloma or whatever parks nearby. Yeah, that makes sense there. Over here, oh, we need to be a little safer. And if they're next door, great. But if they're a quarter mile away, that might be more dangerous.
Yes.
All right.
Because I agree, but keeping, like, just for perspective, we also want to encourage pedestrian stuff. So like, if you live in Las Lomas, is Paloma Creek Park close enough? Maybe that's a quarter mile, maybe it's third of a mile, I don't know, but.
You might feel like you're not giving us a definitive answer, but just through your conversation, we're gleaning excellent information. So keep
Excellent.
going.
Good.
You're giving us a B, okay? That sounds good.
All right, design flexibility. Let's take these two at a time. I'll start with Councilmember Funk. Should we allow standards to be met through a combination of common and private open space? And then should these standards vary based on project size, type, and or location?
I'd say yes to both of those.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom. Yes to both. Make that 3.
Were you in for me?
I'm looking at Charles.
Go to Mark.
I'm just
All
gonna
right.
keep it a simple yes. I think these are good.
Yes.
All right. Indoor spaces should common in, is that good enough direction? Just a good yes, straight up. All right. Indoor spaces should common indoor spaces. So recreation room, indoor pool count towards total open space requirements. And then if so, should we develop specific maximum ratios for indoor spaces? Should those indoor ratios vary based on project type or location? Specific maximum ratios for indoor spaces. Could you, Genevieve, maybe expand upon that?
Sure. Just to clarify, so if you feel like open space doesn't necessarily have to happen outside, it can happen inside. Do you want to cap the amount that they provide inside? So say they have to provide 1,000 square feet, they could do 300 square feet inside, but they have to do some outside. Should we set that ratio to make at least some of it happen outside?
Oh, got it. Okay. I'll start with Councilmember Borbo.
I think perhaps for the larger units, I mean, those ones on your chart, like above 7 units or whatever, I could say yes. For the smaller one, though, I think requiring them to have both might become too complex for them.
So
You
you're
can say yes for the larger.
So you're yes on number 1, and then on number 2, you're saying depending upon the size of the project.
Right. If it's larger, yeah, you could give them a ratio, although again, I don't like to make this stuff too complex. But I think a ratio would make sense. So that you have a larger project, you don't want to say, well, hey, it's all exclusively indoors.
Right.
So
Okay.
can I clarify one thing too? I believe, and Phil or Kelly might be able to substantiate this for me. I believe currently staff has made an interpretation that some indoor open space can count towards the existing. So this is not an additional standard on top of the 300. This is a way to meet that 300 square foot per unit average. Just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I don't think we have anything for indoor open space that's in our code now. And so I guess should we even go there? We do get senior projects that have community rooms and things like that, I think we've utilized for that requirement, but it's just not codified. So I think that's the factor. I mean, should we even go there? So anyway.
But I mean, I think, yes, you should go there, allowing it in the sense that, every bit of space, indoor or outdoor, costs money to either build or develop or whatever, and or not be able to use it for, rentable square footage. So yeah, a common area in a senior complex, I think should count, because it's dedicated to the group, not to the individual.
Okay, so that was Councilmember Borbo. Wait, Councilmember Dares, did you go yet?
I have not.
Okay.
Just for clarification, we're not determining whether or not the common space, can all of it be indoors? Is that what we're also determining as well, or?
Well, correct. What we're saying, number
Because-
1, saying can indoor count toward the total?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Well, yeah.
And
I
then
mean,
if so, should we have a maximum ratio so that it doesn't all end up indoors?
Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm okay with having a combination. I think it kind of depends. I mean, certainly I wouldn't want to see, the reason I ask about it all, if somebody was to say, well, here's my common space and it's all indoors. Well, what's going on inside that indoors? If it's going to be an exercise room that mostly all adults are going to use, Stairmasters and whatnot, then it's not functional for kids. So, but I think it's good to be able to have that space and then count it towards the open space that's outside. So I guess my answer is yes.
So yes and yes. Okay. You can put me down for a yes and yes, Mayor Pro Tem
Yes, and yes.
and Councilmember Funk.
Yes, and yes, I do think that that we should have, it shouldn't all be indoors, but indoors should count. And we might want to be specific in that ratio depending on, what part of town we're talking about, or proximity to parks or some other factor.
Sounds good. All right. So on to parking as soon as you're done writing in that little tiny square that nobody can see. Genevieve can see it. So here, what I want to know tonight, I am very, I'm not big on changing our parking standards at the moment, like just tonight with objectives design standards. I think if the idea of reducing parking when already in so many of our multifamily zones and units, we have parking problems. And unfortunately, that ends up being created by the code and by requirements and things that the state does. So to reduce that anymore, it has to be part of a bigger conversation. And I'm not inclined to do that here. But what would be helpful to look at tonight if we are not going to, and granted, I'll ask for all of your input. This is me saying this. What, if we're not going to reduce parking requirements, what would be helpful tonight, if anything, as it relates to objective design standards? Is it that, tuck under, or tuck around, hey, I want it to look like Rancho Cucamonga? Or do we say, hey, this is something we're going to look at later and keep the current code as it is?
The big items here are just really parking design. Should it be at the front of the site? Should it be the back of the site, side of the site? Should it be tuck under? Should we avoid garages for multifamily projects because they can get turned into different things? Those are the big questions. The other one, I'll just throw out one more thing. The only time, and this can be put off for a future time, we might want to look at something for downtown is when we have these little tiny projects, and we've got two of them on the table right now, where the property owners are really struggling, where there's a tiny lot and they want to build a nice commercial restaurant and they want to build one or two apartments upstairs. And the sites are so small, they don't have any room for parking on their site. And so they come to us looking for options and they're seeking offsite parking. It doesn't really work out. They can't get an agreement. So then their project never goes forward. We've had a couple of those not go forward because of that. So we're not saying, hey, we should take parking away and we should incentivize residential downtown. I don't think we want to do that. But could there be an option for a 1 or 2 unit project on a very tiny lot where they could have another provision to meet their parking requirements so that we can see that development on that little vacant lot, that little infill lot? That's one thing that's happened recently. So it's to think about. But again, that item can be put off because it is of a bigger magnitude and may have other implications to it. I just wanted to plant that seed on that particular topic. But otherwise, if we can just
Okay,
focus
so
on
seed-
location and design.
Okay, so we're located on the site, design meaning covered, not covered, that type of thing.
Yes.
And I will ask, this isn't a dictatorship, so I'm going to ask my fellow council members, are we good with keeping that conversation more in what the director just talked about and not tonight looking at reducing parking requirements?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
I'm okay with not looking at reducing parking requirements tonight. I did have a question on the parking thing, just a question. So you mentioned the stack or whatever, the block over here on Traffic Way. I went and looked at that today and drove up in there. And there's 10 parking spots and 1 reserved or guest parking spot. And it occurred to me when we talked about height and other things in this presentation that a site like that, and this may relate to what you're talking about, with small sites, somebody wants a restaurant on the bottom with a couple apartments on top. But in a site like that, if they had done an additional story, they wouldn't have been able to do the parking, right? I mean, in other words, parking itself limits what they can do with the with the project.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, if we said, no, you can have a third story, but you're gonna have to stack the cars somehow magically or something,
Yeah.
right? So, and then the same scenario that you're describing here. Okay. Thanks.
Charles, also just to note on that one that they did receive a reduction from the state density bonus. So they are below our current code parking requirements.
How many units are in that complex, by the way? If you
It's
know.
however many parking spaces there are, because they did one per unit.
Okay, so there's
so they're at 10 or
10.
11, yeah.
Thank you.
That's a lot of units in that. Wow,
Mhm.
that's surprising. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom, followed by Councilmember Funk.
So parking is always the challenge that we get to deal with at design review committee when it comes to by right projects and things like that that did go through design review. I think parking is a challenge and that it has to be addressed project by project. I don't think that we're going to be able to address those issues at this moment. I think it's just so much larger than that. And at some point, some people are going to be limited with no on-site parking just because of how we've developed around it. And I'm not sure that council can give you a full direction that isn't going to, it's still going to put it as a case-by-case evaluation on a lot of these. And it's a challenge with design review to make that decision. And, with by right and the density bonus, they were able to build that much.
And it just occurred to me, we were going to open up to public comment on each of these things. So if we could go on, so Councilmember Funk, if I could just ask you to hold for one moment. And we did that on, we just did open space, right?
Right.
We've only done one of the 6, but that was a biggie. All right, so parking, as we're going through this, I'm going to ask if there's any public comment on parking as we're going through and making these decisions. If you're in the webinar, go ahead and raise your hand. I'm not seeing any, so we'll close public comment and bring that back. Councilmember Funk.
Okay, thank you. I did have a few specific comments with regard to parking that might be useful for staff to sort of consider as options for the future. But in general, I am comfortable with not opening up the issue of changing the standards right now in terms of quantity of parking, because that is in our experience on the design review committee, the single most common thing that developers come to as a waiver request. And at least if we keep our current standards, it forces them to provide something in return for that stress that it places on the community. The comments that I had are really that I think that we have deep units, and even in those sections, we have some fairly deep properties. I think that we could consider the frontage parking for these areas. If it's with the exception of commercial on the ground floor, we can consider the frontage parking as guest parking, just counting towards the guest parking slots, which would mean that on narrow lots, you don't count very much, but that's, a realistic impact on the community. So that was my main particular. Let me see if anything else. Yeah, and that the rest of them we can go through in the things, I think.
Thank you. So in the questions here, should we develop standards for parking area location and design is the key? I think it sounds like the more we can encourage it behind, and keeping that front facing, looking more, appealing. But I'm gonna actually have Councilmember Daras speak to this first, and then we'll come. We again, the 4 of us will go wah, and then Mark will go, well, actually, and we'll all go, what? Change our minds. So
Curb appeal, that's what we're trying to be able to establish standards that are going to make projects look nice and add to the environment of our city. And certainly parking out front, I think, is not the way to go. So having it in the back, I mean, any of the options that were presented, I think are good. I think a case-by-case basis is where it's going to be. I think Phil mentioned, what if the project's on a corner? How do you handle that? To require like underground parking, I mean, you're increasing the cost of a project probably significantly. So I think case by case, but I think to avoid parking in the front, I think is most important. But having it on the side or the back or any of those other options, I'm certainly good with. I think it's how it's going to be designed is what's important. And the visibility of it.
Yeah, it seemed like the Rancho Cucamonga example looked nice, and it had the benefit of not having covered parking so that we don't have that issue of those being turned into ADUs and preserving the parking that is so very much needed in multifamily. And I don't know if my colleagues recall that, or if you wanted to pull up that picture on screen, but that seemed like something that has that curb appeal.
Right. And I forgot the comment about these possibly being converted to ADUs, which I wouldn't have considered in something like this, but certainly whatever design would avoid that, that's important, obviously.
And so in that one, where exactly is the frontage of the street? Is it down at the bottom of the picture?
It's actually along this, can you see my cursor or does that
Yes.
not show? Okay.
Yes, we can.
It is cropped here, but the street frontage is actually here.
And is there parking along that street?
There is not.
Yeah, I
There's
think,
street parking, but there's no parking line like these
I think that's a nice, it's similar to, I've been to, like the apartments down at Las Lomas, and that's done, it seems, in my recollection, similar to this, would you say, Director?
Yes.
And, uncovered spots. There could be some covered ones, but that I think works well. Do we have a general consensus, kind of that
Well-
curb appeal, keeping the parking away from the street to the
Yeah.
extent possible? And
I have a concern though, and I mean, I like your phrase to the extent possible, but I'm not sure what that means in an objective design standard. And the reason is this, I understand encouraging, the parking in back, but I'm thinking you have a big complex like Emerald Ridge, it's up on a slope. It might be that the parking needs to go out front.
well, but
projects
this might
similar
be
to
a
that.
menu of items.
Right.
That
And they want to
is- yeah.
encourage it, okay, but I don't want to say you can't do that or even require a CUP necessarily to do it. Unless you can't figure out a way to write an objective design standard that encourages it, but encourages rear parking, but doesn't demand it.
There is a way.
Excellent. All right, is there any other input on this, or can we move on to? Do we have consensus?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I watched Rochelle's eyebrows go through the ceiling on that one.
She can't wait to see the magic that Phil and his team come up with.
Yeah, I am a game too on that too. I think we should either, if somebody wants the benefit of easy review with no things, that they should be able to put the parking somewhere, and maybe we have establish an AUP process that allows for exceptions.
Right, and I think that's what they have in mind.
Yeah, as opposed to a CUP, but at least have some process.
Right.
Yeah.
So really what we're saying is the conversation we had in the very beginning, that this could be part of a menu of options that's available. And if they can't make that fit, that's not something, and they're choosing other items from the menu. Or there is that AUP or if necessary CUP process, but you'll come back and bring us those items. Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there anything else you need on parking, or are we good here?
I think, did we cover number 3? In
I
this?
think we do want to discourage more of the parking garages. Well, I do, from the perspective that I don't want those turning into ADUs and then we're having a bigger parking problem, but that's me. So I will go with my
I'll-
colleagues, Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
I'll agree with that. I think that we don't want to incentivize some more reductions in parking as well. I mean, it's already happening by right on most of these projects that have large build outs.
So no closed garages, so that they could be converted to ADUs by right.
Okay, but I mean, I have a question on that. Again, about incentivizing versus kind of requiring. So when you have, like at La Plaza, you have private one-car garages underneath. Are those, I mean, that's a multifamily site. Are those eligible to become JADUs?
No, because it's a
Okay.
commercial district. We don't allow
Exactly.
residential on the ground floor in a commercial district.
Okay, because it's a commercial district, but if it was a multifamily, and if you had the same thing up at Emerald Ridge in a multifamily zone, would
Whole
those
different
be?
story. They would be able to be modified without us being able to say no.
Okay, then in that case, I agree with the mayor then, thank you.
Well, I have a question on that, man. If I'm renting an apartment and I have a garage, that's part of it. Okay, I'm renting it, I don't own it, so I'm not gonna turn it into an ADU. So you're saying that the owner can basically tell me, I'm taking away your garage and turning it into an ADU?
As long as they don't have an agreement that they're breaking. Certainly. So, yeah, but yeah, they can take away that.
I mean,
parking.
but if I'm renting a space, I'm taking away part of the space you're renting, so I can give it to somebody else or rent it to somebody else.
So internally, I don't know how legally that would work, but I will tell you right now, we've already had a couple of projects go through this and they've converted those garages to ADUs in multifamily projects here in Atascadero. Now, I don't know how their internal agreements change. That's not on any of our concern, so to speak. But yeah, this is happening right now.
That's unfortunate because I think having rental spaces, whatever apartments that come with a garage, I think is a plus.
It's a nice amenity.
It's a great amenity.
Well, maybe
to
you
have.
should write a letter to the legislature and they'll do something
Drive
about
to
that.
Sacramento, tell them to knock it off. No, I'm just kidding.
All right.
Okay,
Can we move on or does anyone need to?
Did we need to comment on in lieu fees?
No, that's,
I'm
we're not going there tonight.
Okay, good.
Yeah. All right, so on to height. And the big thing I took away from height is really the request, do we want to remove stories and just focus on feet and then first floor commercial requirements? Is that correct? So should we eliminate stories requirement and regulation by feet on all zoning districts? So I'm going to go left to my right, Councilmember Darrez, yea or nay?
so a question I have on that, and I'm
Mayor?
good.
Oh, yeah. Can we go out to public comment before?
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
See,
We keep
now
forgetting.
Charles, this is your fault that, I'll take it though. All right, public comment on the height requirements. Any public comment? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment, bring it back to Councilmember Darrez.
Okay, thank you. I'm okay with the height, going by height, but I have a question on that. We have a ladder truck that can only reach however many feet, so forget about stories, but if it goes, now, is that ladder, is it necessary for the ladder to be able to reach the roof or just the occupant space? You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying. And that's a good question. I don't know if there's a fire staff
I don't know.
listening to this.
I know they want to
tonight,
get to the
maybe
roof
they can chime
sometimes
in.
to ventilate the roof by, so, but
Yeah,
if-
I believe it's, to rescue people, but I can't.
We do have
definitively-
Chief Bryson on
I can't
our
definitively answer that.
webinar
Jesus.
here. And maybe Chief could answer that
And even-
question for us.
Even Kelly Gleason might be able to answer that question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Chief Bryson here. Can we just rephrase the question? Is the ladder truck reach to the roof or
Yeah, the
certain
question I
story
have
level?
is the ladder truck required to be able to reach the roof or just the upper floor occupant space? Like, the floor level or maybe the window level, 44 inches above the floor.
Right, yeah, so our ladder truck basically is 100 feet tall. So it would reach window level for rescue at second, third, and fourth floor. Fourth floor would be stretching it depending on the setback. But above that, we wouldn't be able to get to windows above basically a third window or fourth floor. So we'd be using that for ventilation for lower buildings, rescue for taller buildings.
I guess what I'm asking is if the ladder was capable of reaching whatever the height is, whatever height we say, okay, this is the maximum height for the top floor, however many floors it's going to be. Is the ladder only required to reach that floor, or is your ladder required to reach the roof of whatever? So that's the height.
Let's instead of getting, I like that you're bringing this up. Instead of getting into this detail, I think what she's putting here is that, hey, here's the limit on the ladder truck. As we're making these decisions, let's make sure, and of course, in concert with the chief, as we always do, that whatever decision we make in terms of feet requirements, that of course, the ladder truck could handle that.
Okay, well, okay, in that sense, the simple is yes, I think go by feet, not floors. I mean, that just makes it simple.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Councilmember Corbo.
Yes, I very much think we should go with the height limitation and not a number of stories limitation, especially in the downtown area.
I will agree on that.
I'll agree.
And Councilmember Funk. Okay, we're your 5-0 on that. Now, should we require a 15-foot first story for new commercial or mixed-use buildings? I'm going to ask, I believe that when we just did the Del Rio project with Valley Fresh, did we say 12 feet? Or did we go with 15? I remember having this conversation.
We had a condition with a number. Kelly, do you recall what that number exactly
Yeah,
was?
I believe it was 15 feet and we measured it to the finished floor elevation of the second floor so that they could have some ceiling variety if they chose to, but that the space would allow for 15-foot ceilings.
Did we reduce that though?
I don't think that we ended up reducing it for the light industrial space. I believe we talked about reducing it for the office space, but I think
That's right. That's right.
Consistent number.
That's right. So does it make sense then to say that, yes, there should be some requirement, whether it's a 12 or 15 foot based on, office versus industrial versus, restaurant, retail, director, does that make sense? Or would it be your recommendation that we stick with a standard 15? And then if somebody comes in with a project that, they can do it in 12, it's still a good project. It accomplishes all of the goals, that could be a discretionary AUP process, or it's part of the menu of options.
The good thing about sticking with one number is it provides flexibility, what land use might be able to go in that building in the future. Because just if you design a commercial building, there's a whole variety of different land uses that could go in it. It could be office, it could be restaurant, could be light industrial. And setting a height gives it the greater flexibility where it can be used for multiple uses.
Okay, thank you. I am going to go for a thumbs up on that one. So let me start with Councilmember Funk is a thumbs up. Mayor
Yes.
Pro Tem Newsom. And
Yes.
Corbo, there is, yes. Okay,
Yes.
we're all good on that.
To be clear, though, you kind of alluded to this in answering the mayor's questions. The 15 feet is needed in particular for things like restaurant uses, that sort of thing, right?
Well, it also might be something
Craft
that's a
brew.
light industrial use and they want roll-up
Right.
doors and they want to be able to have big equipment in there, but definitely in a restaurant because they have all the kitchen equipment and they have a hood
Right.
and they have circulation systems. Look at, for example, some of our new restaurants downtown. You'll notice they have a pretty substantial ceiling height in there. And it creates a whole different feeling as well.
Right. So I
And
mean,
roll
the
up
thing
glass
is,
doors and things.
somebody says, hey, I'm building a retail space. It only needs to be 12 feet. And that would make sense. But we're saying, yeah, but if this ever needs to be available to become something else, that's why we'd like it to be 15.
Exactly.
My only reservation is what kind of a cost factor are we talking about? And would it be, it seems like you'd still be able to potentially get 4 stories within 45 feet if you did 15, 10, 10, 10, right?
You can, certainly.
So we're
Yeah.
not by saying 15, we're not precluding a 4th story. And by saying 15, we're not jacking up the cost like double or
I
something.
don't think it's
like that.
significant to go up that a foot or two
Okay.
higher for that initial plate height.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question on this also. So the 15-foot requirement for commercial space, is that, I just want to make sure is that a minimum? I mean, if somebody said, hey, I want to have my first floor have an 18-foot plate height. And the reason I say that is because having an 18 or even a 20-foot plate height gives the flexibility of a mezzanine area if that's something, an upper office area or something in the lower floor area. So my question is it 15-foot period or is it a minimum of, and the designer or the owner, developer can decide what they want?
The intent is that that's a minimum and that
Yeah.
can be exceeded. You just have to meet the minimum of 15. You could always go more.
Now,
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
I'm just thinking about this for just a moment. Our downtown zone right now actually isn't 45, it's 40. Is that correct? Kelly, I'm asking eternally, I forget. I'm getting confused now because that makes a difference in this.
And maybe Genevieve's got the chart. I believe that downtown might be 45 and commercial park, but I believe our other commercial zones might be a little bit less.
And that's something, you know, and that's where the intent of mixed use is downtown. So, and that's something we can explore later as we get into our general plan update. And it's not that much later. We're talking about over the next 6 months, 8 months, a year. Okay, that helps me there. That doesn't change anything.
So we're going with the minimum of 15 foot on the first floor. I think when we get to number 3, that is a question that we should reserve for the general plan. I think that is a bigger conversation. And I have consensus on that. Okay. Go down to number 4, please, on height. Last one here, commercial nodes near major intersections and our multi-phone zones. What is that
What's the
question?
question? Yeah.
Just because you put a question mark there doesn't mean there's an actual question.
I think this is linked kind of to the same question as number 3, which is probably a more general plan
Yeah,
question.
More general plan. So perfect. So let's do this. We've gotten through the first 3, which is, I think, the big stuff. Well, I hope the big stuff. So why don't we take a break? We are looking at 16 past the hour. Let's go until about 25 past, about a 9-minute break. We'll come back and then we'll go out to public comment on building and unit size. Thank you. All right, we can go ahead and reconvene. City Council is coming back from a recess, and we are now moving on to let's see. We did building height, and now we are on to building size fractional density. Would that be right, Genevieve?
That is correct.
Okay. So I'm going to open public comment to see if there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the particular issue of building and unit size, including fractional, potential fractional densities. Anyone wishing to raise your hand, please do so. I see no one raise their hand. I will bring that back to close the public comment, bring it back to council. Let's see. So going through these questions, should we require maximum or maximum average unit sizes? I'm going to start with Councilmember Funk.
And I would say yes there, but selectively. I think in downtown, we should definitely do something. And we should do this by a maximum average, not by a maximum, a strict maximum. So that we give people flexibility, but that we create that smaller, denser urban experience, less family oriented.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Doesn't this pertain to the general plan previous screen? Sorry, when we were talking about downtown commercial zones, residential zone heights? Or is this a little bit more?
No, this is unit sizes.
So
Oh, the
square footage
number
of unit.
Okay. I think it's just gonna depend on project and the location throughout town, so nodes. This is both commercial and multi. Or does this affect residential zones as well?
This would apply, or this could apply at your discretion, either within residential districts, commercial zones, downtown. Kind of, are there particular areas that you'd like to see this requirement implemented?
I'm just gonna go back to, it depends on projects, sorry.
Yeah, it's hard to come up with objective design standards, especially when we're not, say Irvine. We don't have this perfectly laid out tracts of land and things are pretty, uniform. So I would say yes. And I would go with maximum average unit size because again, this is one of the menu options. It's not something that has to be selected. Councilmember Borbo.
Yeah, I had a question relative to this. Phil, you mentioned that in our RMF 24 zone, we frequently have projects that aren't reaching the 24 units. And it seemed to me that you were mentioning that some of that was they were building large size units. Imagine some of that's the parking limitations, that we have on some sites. But I understand that maybe it's slow or some other city in this county has like an RMF 35 zone. How can anybody get it in there? And is that the objective of you're discussing a maximum size is trying to force larger numbers of units?
Not trying to force, but just really trying to encourage a site to be developed to its intended density so that we don't waste our I wouldn't say waste, but utilize our highest density zones for a different product type than what was intended for them. How can we get these highest density multifamily areas that we carefully plan out? They've got all the infrastructure to serve them, yet they're not getting developed as intended. So that what happens is that other development is being forced elsewhere. So yeah, we're basically just trying to say, how can we get these things to meet or get close to that max density, that 24 units an acre or that 20 units an acre in those areas? How can we get there? Because we've been seeing a history of these 2,000 and 2,500 square foot units in those zones. And that's a little bit different than what we had anticipated years
Because
ago.
I would think that the developer would want to put the maximum number of units possible. I I'm a little reluctant to put a maximum size, and if we did, it should be an average, as the mayor said, not.
The average would be the way to go.
Yeah,
definitely.
not a hard maximum.
And that allows you to
absolutely
have
not.
some larger units, but then forces you to do a few small ones in there as well.
And in doing so, I mean, I would then say on number two, yeah, I mean, I can go live with an average max size if we incentivize using fractional density.
This is one of those things that touches on the affordable by design topic,
Mayor, I have
although it
another-
is a design scenario.
I have another question for Phil.
So the maximum average, that's, you're going to take all the units and the sizes that they are, add them up and then divide by the number of units. And that's going to give you your average. I just want to make sure that's that simple.
Classic
Correct.
averaging. Yes,
That's what we're doing. Okay. So
that's an option. That's
I
certainly
think
an
that
option.
I think that would be the way to go, because then you are going to possibly provide some larger units, which are going to be desirable for some. I was thinking about this also. One of the things with our economic development plan is to try to get ahead of household jobs. And if people are going to come in, they're going to want these bigger units. So to limit all of these rentals to smaller ones, having this as a possibility of being able to have larger units, but then having a much smaller ones, I think is a good mix. So I do like that idea. So I'm good with that.
It's also important to note, we're not trying to limit bedroom counts. I mean, that's a key factor. I mean, we want 3-bedroom units. We just don't want 3,000 square foot 3-bedroom unit. We'd rather see, that reserved for the single family districts, whereas these high density zones should have something in a category of a 3-bedroom unit that's less than 1,500 square foot that really fits. And that way you get these nicer outdoor amenities, you get better open space, you're able to meet your parking, you get your better building design, and then you get closer to your density. So it all fits together with all those other features.
Right. Thank you.
I think you should have 4 green thumbs right there. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
So as I'm looking, I have additional questions on this. So as I'm looking at some of the residential multifamily, we have a corridor residential area for 41 that used to be zoned residential, now is zoned residential multifamily. And it is only mostly 1-level units. You're now saying that they need to can be developed to its maximum unit size up to 10 on some of the partials?
Can you repeat the first part of your question? Did you say along Highway 41?
Off 41, Moore Road.
Off of Moore Road?
Yeah, so when you look at this map, there's certain, like Traffic Way has some that are zoned residential multifamily.
Yes.
There are some that are over off of Atascadero Avenue that are also zoned residential multifamily.
Yes.
But they are in a residential zone and none of their neighbors would want a 3-story next to them. So when we start to look at these and do objective design, we're now requiring a maximum build out on that property. Some of them are affected by ADUs, which is a whole nother story, because you're not allowed an ADU because you have to build it out to a multifamily unit. We currently have one that came through design review that's going to be, 10 units?
Yes.
Right next to, it does have, apartment complex across from it, but everything else about in that area is a single level residential building.
Yes.
When we do the general plan, are we going to evaluate some of those properties because they don't fit the aesthetics or the existing layout of that community?
That is an option for us to look at. I think in that particular location, the properties around that are zoned the same. They're zoned multifamily, but they're just not developed to a multifamily designation because they're much older properties and they're single family, what I call non-conforming residences in that multifamily zone. So you end up with that juxtaposition. I think what we have to be very cautious about is definitely, as we noted really early on in this discussion, the transitions between the districts and the transitions between a high density district to a single family density district, and making sure that we don't create that solid wall against those properties. We did see that at DRC in that project, but from my understanding that both those districts were still in the same zoning district, just that one property wasn't developed to that fullest extent. And so the neighbors were upset about that. And that's a difficult topic to regulate, but it's not out of the question to have an objective design standards, something that you have for your peripheries and something you have to control your transitions. But what you can't have in here is a standard that's controlled subjectively by neighborhood compatibility. And that belongs elsewhere. And that's the challenging thing about these, because they have to become these objective points. And then you get into a subjective territory. So it's a little bit of, we've got to be a little bit crafty. I'll use the word crafty.
I think what I'm struggling with is average unit size. Are we basing this based on building them out to their full capacity? Or do we look at an average unit size based on the area and the other buildings around it?
It would be based on the district and wouldn't be based on its neighborhood compatibility. So we'd have to be careful with that. So we might want to say that in a low density multifamily, which is the RMF 10, there might be a different maximum that's larger. And then your high density multifamily zone, which is where we want our highest density and our most affordability by design.
So
As
on mine, I
compared
want to
to-
make it really restrictive on the RMF 10s, that they not be pushed to its maximum build out. The larger properties, obviously, it's a challenge.
It is quite a challenge. But I think where we're seeing probably the bigger challenges are in these low density multifamily zones, because they're the ones that are more integrated adjacent to these single family zones. But there are some cases where the high density is right there as well. So it is a challenge. And I think that, I won't go on. Never mind.
Okay, thank you. I think talking about the maximum average unit size and being able to have that variety, I think that lends to, ideally different types of, families and individuals that are living there. So I think you start to get a variety of generations ideally, and more people, mingling, cross-pollinating, if you will, that I think just lends to a better community. So it's not that I think we need to dictate that, but in doing this, I think that can be a side benefit.
Mayor, I'm not changing anything, but question, again, these are objective design standards, right? So when we say require maximum average unit size, somebody could still come in and say, hey, I really can't meet that on this particular project. I need to do it. They could still come to you for a CUP or some other exception process, right?
Yes, and I'm very reasonable.
Got it. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Thank you.
All right, on to fractional density. I really don't have, I'm not terribly excited by this, I'll say. Because really one of my questions is when you like Councilmember Bourbeau had said, I would think someone would want to build out to maximum density, but what I've heard from you is that that's actually not the case, because they're finding that they overall can get more money when they're building larger units and selling or renting those larger units than they can a greater number of reduced size units.
That seems to be the case, because the larger number of units is going to require more of this. Well, it requires separate development impact fees for each one, separate water meters for each one, and separate parking spaces for all of those units. And then, yeah, their final rental or sales price is a lot lower, even though they might be able to do 10 instead of 7 larger units. But yeah, you start doing the numbers, and I think the market is driving the larger unit from a return standpoint, given all those factors.
And the question I would have too is, do we know, I mean, we can talk anecdotal, but I don't want to do that here. What I would want to know is, do we have statistics on the actual needs of our community? Are we needing more 3-bedroom places, or are we needing, or do we have people clamoring for the 1-bedrooms? And again, not anecdotally, but is there actual data showing what the need is in our community?
And that's the kind of data we're gathering now for our general plan update. We don't have current data on that.
Okay.
We can start looking at population characteristics, or what people want to have here, and we'll know more about that. I don't think we have that, other than what we assume.
Madam Mayor, if I can
Yes.
comment additionally, that countywide, we don't have that specific to communities, but in the course of developing the strategic plan for homelessness countywide, It was one of the things that was identified from data was a mismatch between the housing stock and the housing needs, particularly for folks who don't have a lot of income and are at highest risk of becoming homeless, where we have a lot of individuals and the federal projects which finance projects like people do tax credit financing for the larger projects like the People Self-Help Housing does, requires a significant proportion of those to be 2 and 3 bedroom units because nationally there's concern about discrimination against families. And what we find in this community is the reverse, that the greatest needs are for the smallest, for the individual units.
And so that's countywide. That's good
countywide.
information.
Yeah,
Good information.
countywide.
It'll be
I don't have-
interesting to
yeah.
see what we find specifically. I'm
Locally, yes.
assuming that that's being done within Atascadero. We're not looking at countywide, correct? We will get specific information to the city. Okay,
Good.
great.
I have
So-
a question on this, if you don't mind, on what, is that okay? Sorry. I interrupted you.
No, you go right ahead.
What is the main advantage or the reasoning for wanting to do like a 500 square feet is a half a unit, and, 2/3 of a unit and so on? Is it because of because it changes the parking requirements?
It's
and
the
other-
incentive. It's the carrot. It's the intended to be the carrot to say, actually, you can do more units on this property if you want to, if you create this kind of a zoning law. A lot of communities use this
Oh, okay, so
fractional
you're,
approach.
okay, so so it's more units, but it's counted as
Is less.
less. So
Yeah.
an RMF 24, you can say, oh, you can do 48 units because you did 500, they're all 500 square feet. I mean, if you can get the fit, I know it's probably impossible, but
Yeah, it might be very difficult to get that fit.
But-
The idea is that
right,
you
but
might do a
okay.
mixture and then you end up with,
But
in an
how do-
RMF 24, you might end up with 30 units, or you might end up with 24 because
right.
of
So how
parking,
does
but I
that,
mean,
how does that calculate into the parking requirements? Because like one unit, I think, it's a number, it's bedrooms, so with the parking.
parking's
right?
based on bedrooms.
Bedrooms,
Exactly.
okay.
So each unit's going to require a parking space, but then a 2-bedroom is going to require, 1.5, 3 bedrooms going to require 2.
So calling it a
Okay.
half a unit, that's not going to affect other site requirements like parking and whatnot.
It's not, unless
So-
we were to change those numbers
Okay.
for those
In-
kinds of units.
And in
Okay.
most jurisdictions that do use fractional density, there is a correlation with, if you use fractional density, there's a correlated reduction in parking because that's how it makes it work often.
Okay, and and that's where I do have a little bit of a concern because we're always seeing, somebody wanting a reduction in parking, building as many units as they can, and then parking becomes a nightmare for the neighborhood and the development and whatnot. So I'm okay with the the half a unit, 2/3 of a unit and so on. I don't think it should really be correlated to the amount of parking because that could create a huge problem.
Yes or
bigger-
no, can we uncorrelate it from, discorrelate, unconnect? What is the correct term from parking? Or is it correlated to parking in that fractional way? Because that would, if that's the case, I'm a no on fractional.
It's not
density.
required to be attached to parking.
So you're a thumbs up as long as it's not attached to parking,
That's
correct, Aris?
correct,
Okay,
yes.
or both.
I'm yes. I think it provides some incentive. It may be one of those things that the incentive doesn't detract a lot, but I think it's good to add this incentive. So I'm a yes.
I mean, as I said, yes, if it's not tied to parking.
Right,
I mean,
understand.
meaning that the parking isn't reduced as a result of fractional density.
Right.
Mayor Pro Tem. I'll say yes. Councilmember Fun.
I'll agree, yes, as long as it's not tied to the parking.
All right, so then down below, so we've got 5 green thumbs. Green thumbs. I do not have a green thumb. Let's see, let's see. If so, should we use a combination of bedroom count and unit size to calculate density?
So this is kind of a nuance. Once you think about fractional density, some jurisdictions, think, okay, it's really about the size. And some, especially when they start to think about linking it to parking, might also want to say, well, it's a 1-bedroom unit that is of this size or a 2-bedroom unit of this size. They just put that additional measure in there. So you have just a little bit more coverage on those.
I'm less inclined to get that detailed unless there is some huge overriding benefit that I don't see. Right, then
Just a different way to look at it. No significant.
I'm going to say I'm a thumbs down on that one. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
I'm going to say pass.
Councilmember Funk.
I think it's a bridge too far. Thumbs up.
I think where it's complicating things, because we just talked about the size being partial units and whatnot. And the bedrooms is what goes towards the parking. So yeah, thumbs down.
Yeah. Overly complicated, thumbs down.
All right. All right. 5 thumbs down. Excellent. So now we'll go to site and setbacks. You can put 5 of those thumbs down there. By the way, you got 4 of them. Oh, just so you know, for the future, it was 5. Oh, I think she said pass on this being yeah. Did I get that right, Mayor Pro Tem? Yes. Okay.
Is there a pass
So site and setback, I'm going to go ahead and open this up to public comment. Anyone in the public wishing to speak, please raise your hand on site and setbacks. I see none. We'll close public comment and bring that back for conversation. Should we consider setbacks that correspond to building heights and stories? And are we talking about upper setbacks as well as the actual, like what we typically think of with a setback? We're thinking not just ground floor, but upper.
Yes, let's take a look at what are the other questions we have here, Genevieve, on this.
Thank you. I was wondering
board.
myself.
Just to take a
This
look
is
at
really just this one question, and it's really as we think about those careful transitions that we want to make to lower intensity uses, are you comfortable with us potentially stepping back that building height? And I think I've heard that pretty clearly. Yes.
I think that is a yes. I think we said that 2 weeks ago in our other conversations. So unless there's a disagreement there.
If I'm understanding you, we're talking about setbacks for upper floors more than, tiered. Yes, I'm
Well,
totally in favor of that.
And I want a clarification on that,
Yeah.
Genevieve. Is this question intended to be the wedding cake question, or is this question intended to be the overall wall plane of the building? Or could this be both? And I want to make sure that's clear for
I think
everyone.
it's both. I think it's a little broader that you're able to come back. Well, actually, I'll let Genevieve answer, but my thought was you would be coming back with, hey, in order to protect that, overlook, to protect the adjacent properties and to make sure there's, not that big wall that somebody's staring at. It doesn't have to be wedding cake, but whatever the type of architecture would be that, that brings that to fruition. Genevieve, did you want to expand a little bit if needed?
I think you summarized it great.
Okay. Councilman.
Yeah, I'd comment on that. I'm not a huge fan of the wedding cake requirement, but I do think I would be really keen on a requirement that says if the taller the building, the more setback the wall plane has to have from the property line, so that it's not such a mass looking over people.
And so we could
and-
have
yeah.
any combination of setting back, whether it's, in my understanding, Genevieve, there are other things besides wedding cake that allow that. I mean, that's just a term we've been using to kind of go floor 1, floor 2, floor 3, like it's a cake. But my understanding is there's other ways to do that. Or is that really the only way? So either we're talking here that somebody maybe could have the option that either you wedding cake it or you move it back further from the property line.
So I think there's a couple of things. So a lot of the zones, have a 35-foot height limit. So in those, you wouldn't really see any additional upper story setback occurring until the 3rd floor. So that one is probably going to be set back nicely. We had an example of it. It becomes a nice outdoor porch area, balcony space on that upper story setback, but it doesn't really feel like a wedding cake because it's only one tier, really. So I think, on the 4-story, if you had something like that did a similar type thing, you could see that wedding cake type design happen. But there's also different parameters that we could put in place about shade and shadow. So, that it doesn't necessarily result in a daylight in a wedding cake scenario because of the orientation to the sun, but that also might not then accommodate some of the transition zone concerns. So I think that the point is that I think I'm hearing that we should be careful with those transitions, of course, and consider perhaps having an option in our menus of ways to meet those transitions, of which those could include upper story setbacks or entire building setbacks.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can we get agreement on that?
Yeah, I want to make sure though, I would, because we're talking about partly about transitions where we have these multifamily structure, multi-story multifamily structures up against a single family property. Because I mean, if we're a multifamily property to multifamily property, I'm not concerned about, setbacks.
Or next
I
to
mean,
commercial.
in cake,
Yeah.
wedding cake
Yeah.
style or whatever. And or in the downtown, I'm not necessarily concerned about that. But I am concerned about it where you have these, a big apartment complex overlooking somebody's single family backyard. Right, that's where I would be concerned about us having this sort of setback or structural setback.
Can I just get a clarification on that? Similar to Mayor Pro Tem's discussion of the neighborhood on Atascadero Avenue, you may have one of these big ones in a multifamily zone that has been built up with all single family houses. So do we want to base it on the zone? Or are we looking more for what's actually built, or does it make any difference?
That's a challenge.
I would say that's a compatibility thing. And I know we talked about, I think that's a subjective, not objective, but I think that is an important factor to consider. First come, first serve. I mean, if that's the way it was developed, then the next person has to be, I would say, at least a little bit sensitive to that. It seems a little odd. I don't always
Well-
agree with that philosophy, but I think in this case,
And I know that's a detail. I'm just trying to
yeah.
tease out a little bit
I
more
mean,
so I understand
the
it, because I saw
challenge-
you all nodding.
Yeah, but the challenge with that is let's say someone comes along and we've got all these restrictions or requirements because they are next to a single family or duplex. And so they are hampered, by what they could legally do. We're saying, no, you cannot do that. And then 3 years later, the property next to them goes, well, hey, let's go ahead and redevelop this. And then they're going to the max. And now this property owner has not got to take full advantage of their zoning. So
Right.
it's a challenge.
Well,
That's
to
a
me,
good point. I totally agree with that.
yeah, and I think though, the point is, let's say somebody elected to build townhomes, single-family townhomes on RMF property. The RMF property next door to them shouldn't be penalized for that or required to meet a higher standard because of that. And to answer, I mean, from my perspective, so the answer to your question is no, this only applies to an RMF property bordering a single-family zoned property.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom, or actually Councilmember Funk, you had wanted to speak earlier and then followed by Mayor Pro Tem
Sure,
Newsom.
okay, thanks. I think that we should differentiate between the RMF 24s and the RMF 10s. This is much more a neighborhood issue in the RMF 10s. And there, I think we look at trying to have setback requirements that are workable that allow for the neighborhood to either remain developed as it currently is, where many of those don't achieve their full potential, or develop with units. So I think if we try and do a little bit more in setbacks, it's not so, we're not so dreadful in having the multifamily next to the single family properties.
Phil is so easy to work with. Do you have the zoning map? I know you originally pulled it up, but it's not in a capacity where you can actually read the,
Let me see what we can get.
I know it's on the city website. So
Um,
as we have been looking at ADUs and looking at zoning, you start to see the disconnect between the zoning and how the layer of RMF 10 backs up to single family. People self-help is RMF 10 was built all single family. So it set precedents and continued precedents in a community that is single family. But if you look at those properties, 2 houses in is RMF 10, and then all the neighbors around it and behind it are single family. So as we start looking at these density and these build outs, when we get to general plan, we should probably evaluate what we're doing with the density, because the decisions we're making today affect all of those residential. And I know people own property and can do as they want with it. And I'll just say my properties are zoned 2 different ways. It is a challenge on making global decisions and being objective when you can look at that map and see, it looks like there's no rhyme or reason of how that happened.
So I think what I'm hearing is, and what we want to do is we want to put things together enough tonight so that we can have these standards that we can start using, even before we get to the general plan. So might we have some consensus on, okay, RMF 24, probably most of those aren't backing up to single family or something, but if it does, then we certainly need to look at setbacks and consider building height issues. But in the RMF 10, maybe there's a little bit more sensitivity in how to figure that out. And is it enough to be able to say that, Director Dunsmore, without us giving you more specific direction about RMF 10? Is this conversation enough to kind of bridge the 2 thoughts?
It is, and I don't think we can get more specific.
Okay.
It's really challenging to do that. I'm actually perusing the zoning map now, and I think based on Councilman Newsom's comments, and these are topics that we'll have to address with the general plan update, as well as we potentially create different zoning district boundaries and different densities. And this is the kind of thing that has to be carefully considered when you do that activity. But it's very difficult to consider that in objective design standards, because you still have to go zone by zone.
And I'm just going to say that it's really hard. We're making this decision in DRC without objective standards. We're allowing them, we're developing, and we're not even to the general plan. So we're making these decisions without a roadmap because it's by right. And so it's nice to have objective standards in place, but some of the developments that are coming through, we as a council are just now going through the parameters of how we see the community build out the density, dealing with ADUs, dealing with the state mandates, all of this. And by right, we are allowing development that will forever change these communities. So thank you for tolerating me.
Councilmember Funk.
But I understand, I share the frustration with dealing with this, with the state mandates that don't always fit our community. But I just wanted to, before we leave the whole topic of setbacks, I have some additional questions. Is this the time?
Please, yes.
Okay. First question, why is the setback for the rear greater than the setback for the sides? What's the rationale?
What's the rationale of the existing zoning, why it does that?
Yes. Mhm.
The thought is that at the rear, you're really, adjacent to somebody's backyard. And the idea is that the traditional backyard is kind of this sacred or more protected space from overlook. And so that probably was, the origin of those original regulations. And many cities are written in that same fashion. A lot of cities, though, just have the same setback all the way around, side and rear. So,
and I think I'll add on to that. I think, this is the historical way that things have been done. So, I think in general, the lot is longer than it is wide. And so, historically, that's the way that setbacks in single family zones and most residential zones have been regulated. Doesn't have to stay that way, but that's the origin. Kind of the long and skinny lot is the predominant feature.
You're more likely to use your backyard as your recreation space, if you will, with family and whatnot. rather than the side yard. So it just gives you further distance away from the people on the other side of the fence. So your private space is farther away from your neighbor's private space in the back because you're not using the sides anyway. So I mean, that's my rationale for it. That's what I would think.
Sure, and I think that that works in a lot of properties. I'm sort of keenly interested in setbacks relative to what's next door. I'm not worried about the creep factor of overlooking somebody's septic leach field because the leach field is not going to care. And the kids probably shouldn't be playing there. But I'm not concerned about, we have a lot of properties in this section where the front is El Camino Real and the back is Highway 101. I'm not worried about the setback relative to 101. That'll be
And
governed
I
by
think
county.
that's why we are talking about what is it next to. We have talked about that, and that's why part with the ADU, we're bringing that back to have that conversation with regards to where is it located. If it's on a street, if it's overlooking a commercial building, then we're taking that into account.
Right, but I didn't see that, any questions about that relative to these standards for multifamily. And I think that consciousness of what's next door is much more important than the sort of the traditional way of thinking.
I think
about
that is what we said, though, is that if you're talking like RMF 24, unless you do happen to back up against a single family or a smaller, which is probably unlikely. And if you do, then we do need to make sure we're very conscientious of the setbacks. But we're saying in the RMF 10 to look at what is it, to be a little more more conscientious when you're looking at what RMF 10 could be surrounding. But certainly if it is next to a street with nothing there, or you're overlooking a block wall, I think they know that that is part of the standard, that we can say there isn't a setback additionally required.
Yeah, okay. I think I wanted to do that. And I also think that we could consider the same setback all the way around for situations where the rear overlooks something that isn't going to be a problem. And that when I'm sure that, I mean,
I don't know if
want to
we
be the
can
standard.
say what a problem is or isn't, because you mentioned a leach field several times. I have a septic tank, I have a leach field. You would never know where the leach field was. Like, it's part of the lawn, like people might play out there and be out there. So it's not like some cesspool where there's a big fence around it
Yes.
that nobody goes to. It's just a normal backyard.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. So, that might be, not.
I think this is maybe more
consideration.
general plan, like as we get there, but I think you see where Councilmember Funk is going, and
Yeah.
certainly we would all agree that we don't want some restrictive setback in an RMF 10 or 24 if it's, overlooking a parking lot, or, somewhere where a setback really isn't needed, then we would go with the standard. Is that?
That could be a menu item, right? I mean, if you.
Loving the menu, Phil.
Menu.
But
Love
my
menus.
answer, my simple
Yeah.
answer to this question is yes, I think there we should consider setbacks corresponding to building height and stories. On a case-by-case basis with Phil's menu.
Do you have enough to go forward with objective design standards based upon this 5 crazy people in front of you right now?
Site and setbacks were looking good.
All
And all
right.
the previous ones were looking great as well.
Great. Genevieve, send us on to number 6, I believe, which I'm going to first open this up to public comment. This is building facade design and other factors, which there seem to be about 27 other factors. So I'm going to open up public comment to this item. I'm seeing no one, so we'll close public comment and bring it back to council. And this, Genevieve, how many questions are there? Because as you went through this, there is a ton, and I realize that this is also, not to overuse that menu option, but this is a menu type of situation. And I would ask that once you tell us exactly what you want, I'm going to ask Councilmember Darris to go kind of maybe set the stage for us. I didn't give you a heads up on that, Mark, sorry. But okay, good.
Occupational hazard.
But Genevieve, what are the different areas you're going to ask us? And are you going to ask us to, okay, of these 27 things, do you want to require 10 out of 27? What do you want from us here?
I wasn't actually going to go to that level of detail unless you'd like to provide it.
No, I do not.
So the intent here is really to provide the scope of all of the objective standards. So we've kind of already covered massing and orientation in our discussions before, as well as parking design. I think we have pretty clear direction on what you're looking for there, and really landscaping and open space. Unless you'd like to give us any additional feedback on those parameters, I think we could move on to the facade design components.
I think we can move on to the facade design components.
And here, I think Councilmember Darius can be the expert in this for sure. But what we're really looking for here is just any kind of anecdotal thoughts that you have that you would like us to consider as high level important among these type of things. We're also happy to create some standards around these. Really building that box was important to us. So all of those questions that you've answered already tonight help us, and we can use some best practices, but we'd like to hear from you tonight too about some of your key considerations around facade design, and what good design looks like to you in Atascadero. So we can talk about facade design in general and the different categories within that, entryways for residential and non-residential. I would like to hear from you if you feel like we need to have standards for roofs or not, because I think my gut feeling is that we wouldn't have them, but if you really want them, I wanted to know that. And any thoughts on the opportunities that the trash enclosures. So this is more of give us your thoughts, and less directive with questions.
Great. Thoughts and less directive. So you're not asking us to thumbs up and thumbs down these 7 or 8 or 9 different areas and give you all sorts of little comments. You're wanting sort of each of us to go through and say what we think is important in terms of facade and these specific items.
Correct.
You sure? Kind of looked up and to the right and I was wondering, did she really mean that? Okay. So
Sorry, I'm
Councilmember
looking at my screen.
Okay, got it. Why don't you go ahead and start, Councilmember Darris?
Well, like I said earlier, my concern with this particular part of it is designing from the outside in. We don't want to do that. You've given a lot of good examples with these pictures on what are good facades, and there may be a couple in there that I didn't really like, but that's not important. But articulation is important. I think different materials, a mix of materials are important. I'm not really sure how to put this in a standard. I mean, that's the part that I think just articulation. I'm not sure how else to put it. I mean,
If you can't put it, we can.
I know. Well, this is the hardest part because this is the part that everybody's going to see. And, I'm used to, you design from the inside out and then you make the outside fit, and you do it in conjunction. You're considering the exterior and how, you don't want a big flat wall. Obviously, we've talked about that. You want balance. I always call it, a certain amount of balance. It's like design. It's like writing music. How's it all going to flow? Where the windows placed, the amount of windows, the height of the first floor. We talked about that. I think that's important, especially in the commercial district. That's going to ground the building and make it feel like it's got its weight at the bottom is where you want it. And just really the general balance of the building with materials, shape, setbacks, if there's going to be some articulation in that. Material.
Councilmember Darris, are there any materials that you would say we wouldn't want to include these materials?
Certain wood, certain lesser, let's say, I don't want to say you use the word cheap, but I will anyway. Cheap wood siding and stuff, it never lasts long enough. If you know who Frank Gehry is, he likes to really use different types of materials, and sometimes it just looks like he went to a junkyard and put some stuff together, and he's famous for it. But I think on a case-by-case basis, we did that with the project that we would just discuss. It's on Traffic Way. That one, I know it came to the design review committee with design, where the design and the materials just did not feel like it fit downtown because of it was a nice design, but it really was completely out of place. And maybe I think it was too modern, or it just didn't fit. And then they changed it up, and now we've got what we've got, which I think is nice. But I think in some cases, it really needs to be a case-by-case basis. I don't know, really, I think I'd rather, maybe might be easier if I just responded to some of the things that you guys are coming up with. And because maybe that might spark some stuff with me, but otherwise I think it's just, what was explained here, articulation and height and setbacks.
I'll just keep going down the line. So Councilmember Volkov.
Thank you. I think that most of these things are too subjective for us to put in an objective design standard. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, although I will say that I noted this earlier when you went through on the slides, this building in the upper left of the slide you have here now, I find just hideously ugly. And so whatever that material is, if you want to know a material I don't want to see, it would be that one. But I don't rate my, taste above other people's tastes. And so I am just reluctant to try to impose a standard here on some of these things that are so subjective.
I think the word that I keep popping into my head, I remember from college, vernacular, what's in the area? What are we designing around? You can't limit yourself to that. I mean, if you're going to build La Plaza is a perfect example. That building in a different part of town probably would be like, why are you building it like that? Where in a completely different type of building built where it is, it's like, well, wait a minute, it needs to look like City Hall and the Carlton and whatnot. So those types of things is what you're going to look at, like, because then you're less subjective and you're more looking at what's in the area and getting it. You want it to fit in the neighborhood. Compatibility, I guess, is another way to put it.
Yeah, the challenge is you could look at some neighborhoods and go, oh, we don't want more of that. So how do you, just something to think of. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Have a little chuckle because I am one of those that voted on that building on downtown that was called Tijuana something. So I think material is all subjective to the property and its location. We originally talked about having different nodes where we had different types of materials that are used that are complementary to that neighborhood. And I really think it depends. I think this is too much into the, I don't know, great details. I think every developer is going to bring something to the table and each one's going to have its own perspective. Some of the projects that we have seen and approved on DRC turned out to fit, even though on a piece of paper they didn't look that good or they didn't fit the mold what we're used to. So at this point, I'm not going to say there's one or another that I don't think we should have. I think it's up to the community and project location.
Councilmember Funk.
Yeah, I concur that we want to allow a lot of flexibility on this one because I have been continually surprised. I, for instance, did not think that a building built out of containers, sea trains would look anything decent across from the Carlton, and it works. Which continually amazes me. So that was a humility moment there. But I also am concerned if we are silent on this, that we are asking for trouble, because the cheapest way to build something is to have the facades, maybe not the front ones, but the ones that other neighbors are going to see and that are going to affect the quality of life in the community, to be flat walls that tend to look industrial. So I would like us to grit our teeth and find a way to require some stuff so that we do not allow the default to industrial looking flat wall. That being said, I'm thinking that that we should ask staff to come back with us with, choose, one or two of this, or if you do this, you don't have that. If you have physical articulation or changes of materials, or changes of color and some other things. So you're not just painting stripes on the thing. So, right. So, something that there should be some element that isn't no flop, so some articulation.
Let me
Is
see if
that
I can.
enough for staff?
Let me see
to-
if I can pull
I mean,
this together.
yeah, thank
So what we're wanting is, we want to be subjective within the objective design standards. And what that looks like is some of what Councilmember Dara's was saying is that you've got, articulation, you've got differences in materials. Let's not use this super cheap, awful stuff. And can we put together some of these things enough? And as Councilmember Funk said, maybe there's a menu, and I think that was mentioned in the staff report of saying, okay, of these 5 different things, pick these 3, because what we're trying to avoid is this big, ugly industrial building that neighbors are having to look at. And quite frankly, everybody that drives by for the next 50 to 100 years. But yet, as we said, Atascadero is somewhat eclectic. So we're not going to require that everything look a certain way. Director, could you think of some ways to put that together?
Let me fill in the gaps here just a little bit.
Perfect.
Because I think we should have had really some questions with this facade design to help lead this discussion. It's a very challenging one. But I think what we're thinking are things like, should there be a minimum type of difference in the materials? In other words, should we have a minimum of 2 or 3 different materials on every building plane wall? Should there be a minimum of 1 or 2 or 3 different types of colors on each wall? Should there be minimum or should there be maximum distances of a wall before you break that wall plane with at least a 1 foot or 9 inch setback or articulation piece? Should there be a minimum amount of glazing or windows on a wall, a percentage of that wall? These are the kind of things that we would put into objective standards, and it could be in a menu. So think along those lines. That can be a way to get us to that spot without dictating a specific design and without really cornering somebody into something. But instead they have, okay, you need to do these kinds of elements.
Okay.
Without restricting material or being subjective.
Okay, so could we actually break that down? I don't know, Genevieve, if you took notes on that, but like, hey, these 5 things, what would we want to kind of give some feedback on? And you come back with this, hey, 3 out of 5 or 2 out of whatever. Because again, some of us can sit here and subjectively say, hey, I like this or that. Obviously, Councilmember Dara's can give more of a professional, hey, in my experience, here's what I've seen, and we can rely somewhat on him. But as Councilmember Funk said, a lot of people didn't think a container was going to work. And a lot of people still hate the container. I happen to like it, but everyone's different. A lot of people don't like the theater. I think it's hideous. I think it's great. I've had people actually not like La Plaza because it's too big. I'm like, are you kidding me? I think it's amazing. So, things are going to differ, but ultimately we don't want this big block. And how do we achieve not getting that?
And I think, Director, I think you hit on it with, because I kept using the word articulation, but trying to figure out, okay, how do I explain that? How do you prescribe that? And but what you've said is, what I totally agree is, a wall plane can't be more than a certain size. Question is, what is that size? It can't be certain length or height or square footage. We do that with signs on a building. You get a grocery store and you say your sign can only be so many square feet. Well, a plane on a wall can only be so many square feet, whatever that is. That is good. And then it has to be set back or recessed or something, and something needs to go on to change it to the next space and so on. That, if you can put that in a menu item or prescribed way of doing it, I think that certainly would work.
So let me ask our city manager. I think she looked like she had something to say.
I think that we've kind of heard where your brain is on this and what it is you want in general. You're looking for something that has some quality designs, avoids there are some things that look very industrial that are meant to look industrial, but between, entries and facades and materials and colors and articulation and glazing and all of those things, we think that we can provide the flexibility to do that. I think maybe trusting it to Phil and his team and Genevieve. They've sat through many, many, many DRC meetings. They've sat through many, many, many council meetings. I think at this point, maybe they could come up with some of those numbers and what we're thinking and what is it that brings those interests.
I think that is perfect. I think we trust you've heard enough, and we trust staff to bring that back to us based on what you've heard.
Just one quick comment. I know that in the DRC, we've talked about when I was on it, the one thing that came up a lot, I know this is subjective, but high quality design. When you look at when certain projects, we wanted to see high quality. Well, what is high quality? Well, the designers usually responded well to that in my experience, because they want high quality. So then they'll add a little bit of this and change, make the roof a little bit different, or better windows, a different, fancier front door, or whatever it might be. We're talking about houses. But even that word alone, I think the designers typically responded well to that. If that could be part of something that could be in this, I think that might have some value.
And I'm guessing based on our conversation that none of us are going to go with, particular roof designs. Would I be correct there? All right, we're all good on not dictating.
Case by case
roofs.
basis on the
Case
roofs for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm inclined to also allow a little bit of stuff poking up on top of the roof. If one can restrict the dimension of it. Maybe you don't have to put a 25-foot cell tower on the top of your roof and allow that, but maybe we can, allow a little bit of mechanical. In particular, consider allowing enough in mechanical so that air conditioning units could be placed on the top instead of right next to the neighbors.
All right. Phil, Genevieve, Kelly, anything else that you need from us
I
on?
think we missed the entries and porches, just
No,
one.
that is included. We trust you.
Oh,
Figure it
great.
out.
Confidence.
On
Wonderful.
the
And-
impertinent.
Trash, we didn't talk about trash.
Just a comment on the impertinence. Yeah, the impertinences and trash and things. It should never look like an afterthought. It really needs to be part of the architectural it needs to be included as high quality with everything else.
Inset, Phil. Answer is inset.
And I would also encourage or incentivize a shared trash. If we can do that, because one of the things that you find, particularly in these sections where we've got relatively narrow frontages. Yeah, if you drive down Santa Isabel on trash day, you can hardly get, three-quarters of the parking of the street parking is taken up by everybody's trash cans. Because you've got all of these units that go back a ways and everybody's got their own set of trash cans. And if we can design that into it, so you've got designed units that are part of that are kind of a commercial pickup. And I don't know what we have to do with waste management to make that happen, but that alone would be a significant quality of life improvement in a lot of neighborhoods to manage the trash communally rather than individually.
All right.
Mayor,
Sufficient.
before you move on, one quick question. On roofs, you said we're not going to mandate roofs, but if planning comes up with, hey, these could be
Bingo.
part
We
of it.
trust, that goes under, we
Perfect.
trust staff, but we're not going to sit here and tell you about the roofs.
Perfect.
All right. This says provide direction in my staff report, but here on the agenda, it says we're making a motion, but I don't see that there's a motion to make. So I just want to clarify that. No motion, correct?
And we're looking to Laura, our city clerk, to see whether we need to make a motion or whether it's just
Okay.
direction as was in the
Okay.
staff report. And I think just to summarize, first of all, thank you for all the feedback tonight. This has been really, really helpful. To summarize, there was a couple different options on this, and I want to assume that right now we have a direction for staff to go ahead and start formulating a draft set of objective design standards. And our option would be, one option would be to carry that forward through the process and come to you for adoption, or do we want to come back to council to look at this for more discussion? I want to make sure that we.
I think, I don't know if I speak for all of us, but I think I'd like to let's get this going. I think we are required to bring this to planning commission.
Anytime we play with Title
right.
IX, our code does
So I
require us
think
to go
as,
through that.
if planning commission is, they're clear that this is the direction coming from council and that, the things that you're bringing to them are the things that we asked for, and providing their input as it relates to that. So yeah, I think unless we think we need another session, I'm sure Charles is like a heck no. All right, we're good.
Okay.
Anything else? All right.
Thank you.
On to, do we need a break or are we good to go on to, okay, keep going. Let's press through. C2, we should be done soon. Contract to award the North County Broadband Strategic Plan Project. Very exciting. And this will be our Lorelei Capel.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, all right, we're here to talk about item C2, the contract award for the North County Broadband Strategic Plan Project. We're very excited to bring this to you because this is a great example, number one, of collaboration between the North County communities of Paso Robles and Atascadero, as well as a lot of momentum from that you've set forth as a city council by prioritizing broadband. So with no further ado, we'll talk a little bit about the project, the consultant we've selected, the scope and methodology, and what we'll be doing next. Sorry. Oh, yeah. Hold on. I'm going to. Is that working? Well, it's up there. Okay, I was trying to make sure my camera is on. Okay, so when you developed the City of Atascadero's action plan, broadband was called out in several sections in the 2021-2023 action plan. The priorities included safe and hospitable business environment, which referenced broadband, business infrastructure, technology and support, as well as supporting families. And all of those tie back to creating infrastructure to support head of household jobs, quality, affordable access to broadband for our families and those who were, when our deficiencies were shown and highlighted across, well, really the nation during COVID. So this is really something we wanted to prioritize. In 2021, we had a lot of foresight and allocated SB 1090 funding towards the Future Broadband Initiative. And lastly, the state and federal, what's this? Hold on. State and federal funds have been coming down the pipeline specifically for broadband. The state of California has billions of dollars. The federal government has billions of dollars specifically for infrastructure projects and planning towards broadband. In May of 2022, an MOU was signed by our Honorable Mayor Moreno and Martin from Paso Robles and Atascadero. In July, the City of Atascadero and Paso Robles collaborated on a broadband strategic plan request for proposals to bring in some consultants to help us align ourselves for future funding and help us understand what we need to do and what projects would be prioritized if we were successful in bringing in grant money. And then we, later this summer, interviewed consultant teams and started negotiations this month with Teleworks, which is a company I'll tell a little bit more about in a moment. Really, this is important because there's a lot of moving parts right now and everyone's just running out of the gates to get this broadband work underway. They know that everyone's trying to align themselves for funding, but it's really important. And we've been working with our jurisdictions to the north, south, and multi-jurisdictional county efforts to make sure we're all aligned and we're not stepping on toes. We're working together and definitely not conflicting. So we just yesterday had a great call with the County of San Luis Obispo about their efforts. We've been talking with SlowCog as they've worked with the county to do theirs, and the City of San Luis Obispo is actually working on a broadband strategic plan now, we've just learned. Good news is we're already working towards signing on with a consultant. We're out of the gates, and I think everybody else is going to be able to look to us to say, hey, we're going to need to follow someone's lead and kind of work together. And here's a great model that's already in place. So a little bit about the Teleworks company. They were founded about 30 years ago in Virginia. Our lead consultant is John Harden, and he is in Texas, but is doing quite a bit of work on the Central Coast, including in Santa Barbara counties, and can share a little bit about their projects in a moment. They have an expertise in strategic planning. They also develop not just the network design, but they also talk about the governance and how broadband is going to really work when it comes to cities. And they don't just say, hey, here's your solution. We think you should start a fourth utility. They say, well, tell me about how your system works now as a city, and how as a county, maybe you can kind of look at the governance of this project to make sure it's sustainable and successful long-term. So that's really exciting for us. They're really big in smart cities and connecting the gap of innovative solutions for broadband. And they've done work all over the world, including recently a lot of projects in the Middle East, which are very fascinating. That we were really impressed in our interview with them. So a couple of the projects I just mentioned that they're working on locally are their client is the Chumash and Economic Alliance for Santa Barbara County. They're also doing kind of a fiber network and design and cost estimate. They're doing some economic analysis for Santa Barbara County. And they're also working kind of on an asset map for San Ynez Band of Chumash Indians. So lots of work on the Central Coast. I think we'll be the beneficiary of some scale of magnitude, I guess, in some of their work, which is exciting. And there's a lot of lessons learned that they're bringing to this project too, because as everybody gets started on this project, it's really nice to learn from everybody's mapping experiences and data collection experiences too. So the real goal for this project isn't just to create a strategy and leave it at that. We really want to align ourselves for future funding. And you might, some of the people listening might wonder why we've teamed with the city of Paso Robles. For the last several years, grants that have been coming down the pipeline are encouraging a regional approach to grant writing. So the more communities that we can include, the more people we can collaborate with, and the more efficient we can be with multiple jurisdictions, the better our chances are in receiving grants. So this is one example where it worked great for us to collaborate with our city to the north. And we do have the County of San Luis Obispo. They were a part of our selection committee for this project. So we're bringing them in, even though they are working on a separate effort. We are in lockstep and making sure that the project that they're going to be doing for the unincorporated areas will fit together with the puzzle pieces, with the big hole in the middle of our donut between Paso Robles and Atascadero. So, and of course, we've got Santa Margarita to our south, and we've got San Miguel to Paso Robles north, and we won't be ignoring that. We're really working on a string of pearls and connecting everything. So really one of the goals of the California Broadband for All initiative, where a lot of the funding is coming from, is to provide high performance broadband to homes, schools, libraries, and businesses, making sure that there's an open access infrastructure mapping system. So if you've ever seen some of the city's online GIS mapping, it's an interactive way of looking at all of the data. You can do queries where it's like a sieve, where you start big and say, I want to see everything that is has speeds of this level. And I want to see, so you'll be able to kind of drill down to see who's connected, what are the underserved areas or unserved areas in each of the communities, and where are the big holes that we need to fill. So that's going to be really important moving forward. And that's a state requirement as well. So we'll be addressing these in this project. And then of course, providing affordable service and the devices for all. One big piece of all of this work that's coming down the pipeline and the requirements is equity and inclusion. So in the past, a lot of the projects that have developed infrastructure for broadband have been about the highest return on investment, because they're done by for-profit companies that are looking to see how many houses they can serve. So that's where the broadband in the past had been kind of prioritized. We need to make sure with our projects that we're looking at the areas that aren't necessarily looking at the greater group of people that can pay higher bills for broadband. It's how do we get everybody, the people that didn't have Wi-Fi during the pandemic and were online for school. We're the state and actually across the world, we're starting to look at high-speed internet connectivity as a right, just like water and electricity are. So this is really exciting about really focusing on digital inclusion. The deliverables for this project is going to synthesize into a strategic plan. And what that plan will include is a really big dive into the gaps for the unserved and underserved, like I just mentioned, the low speeds. So we pay a certain amount for certain speeds. We want to make sure that's really what people are paying for. There's areas that the network is unstable and it goes down. So reciprocal access in some cases, people would say, why would you put fiber in the ground if we know it exists somewhere? But we've understand now that duplication is really important, and having infrastructure in the ground allows more providers to come in, and it creates some competition, but it also really allows people to diversify and make sure that we are always served. So that's really exciting as well. We're also going to be using this strategic plan to prioritize projects that are the most important for our community and serving our people, and understanding where are the grants that we can get to actually do these very costly projects that we as a community or as private sector providers don't have. So when we follow the money, we're actually looking at what are the holes, what are the priorities, what is our big bang for our buck. And if we got a grant tomorrow for $20 million with the city of Paso Robles, where would we both spend that? And we need to be ready in the beginning of 2023 to say, this is our priority and this is where we would spend that. We're ready. This is what it would look like, and apply for grants. So that's our goal. There's quite a bit of public engagement in this process. We're talking about engaging everyone from internet service providers that are already here to internet service providers that are outside of the area that might consider coming to our area. We're talking about educators, anchor institutions like schools and libraries. We're talking about bringing in technical experts that might not be, they might be IT directors for the county or Cal Poly or cybersecurity folks. So people who know a lot about this, who know what questions to ask, so they can help inform our consultants' work as well. They're asking questions that we might not even know to ask about because we're not all in the world of broadband necessarily. So this will be really great as well. And of course, our consultant team will be here at the city of Atascadero and Paso Robles giving public presentations to make sure you are all informed as we move through. This is actually about a 4-month process. So it is going to be a rather quick project, but that's doable, and that's what's happening in other counties and communities. So that's kind of what we're estimating. And so it'll be a quick updates, but we'll get those on the calendar in advance so you can kind of follow along, and we can keep everybody up to date and make sure we're answering questions as we go. So here are the 4 general tasks of our consultant's scope of work: meetings and outreach. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of that. Data collection and GIS analysis, broadband network design, including the priority projects that I mentioned earlier. And finally, this is my favorite part, is I've heard from other communities and done some homework that sometimes they get a consultant's plan and it's a solution and it says, here's what you need to do. Well, they're actually going to be looking at scenarios for us. If the city of Atascadero wanted to have a 4th utility and be a provider of broadband service, this is what that could look like. And here's what you would really need to do to make that work. If you wanted to create a joint powers authority for all of the county of San Luis Obispo or North County, here's how that could be managed. And here's how this is being done elsewhere. And these are the steps that would need to take to make that actually happen for your community. So I loved that idea that we wouldn't be in any situation where we wouldn't have a perfect workable solution at the end of this. So that's a big piece of this project as well. So really, this comes down to next steps. We envision that if we are authorized to move forward with this contract, and we will be able to kick off in the next couple of weeks. And as soon as we're under contract, we'll be, of course, tracking and applying for grants. And we're doing that right now as we speak. We're also hoping that you'll authorize us to create an addendum to our MOU, which is a side letter. That's part of the staff report requests for recommendations. And that will help us look at going for technical assistance grants that are available right now that the city of Paso and Atascadero are also working on teaming on. We'll continue all of our coordination with the agencies around us to make sure there is no duplication and we're only supporting or building off of one another's work, and sharing data is very important as well. And then, of course, off we go, implementing a strategic plan and continuing grants. So that is the long and short of it. I'm happy to answer questions, but our recommendation is for the council to authorize the city manager to execute a contract for $200,000 with Teleworks for the preparation of the North County Broadband Strategic Plan, which would be split 50-50 between the cities of Paso Robles and Atascadero. So our fair share would be 100,000, and so would Paso Robles. We've both authorized funding to pay for those projects at this time. And also authorize the city manager to sign the side letter that I mentioned earlier that really drills down to the details between Atascadero and Paso and how we will split this work, how we will share the cost, how we will manage and co-manage this project together, which we're excited about, and collaborate on this project. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to you for any questions or discussion.
Thank you. Great job, Lorelei. I know you and Paul Sloan have worked together on this, and it's great that we are partnering with Paso Robles. We've been able to do that in other things, but to see this come to fruition in such a big way is really exciting. And thank you for everything that you've put into this. With that, I will look to council for any questions. I'm just looking at your squares here, and if you want to raise your hand, no questions. All right. So we'll go ahead and open up to public comment. I'm seeing someone who may want to speak. You don't have to, but you are more than welcome to. You want to raise your hand? Yep, Maria, I thought you might. Come on down.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can, Maria.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I am actually part of the project team. I was invited by Teleworks to join the project team on behalf of the project that we've been working in Santa Barbara County. So part of this work effort will be done by the Broadband Consortium of the Pacific Core. Specifically, we were able to reduce the overall cost of the project by using the consortium services, specifically around data collection, speed testing, needs assessment. So there wasn't a way to sort of bring some resources from the consortium to this project. So super excited about that. Looking forward to presenting to your city council and conducting a lot of those outreach meetings. I will be serving as the project manager on this project for Teleworks, and working with John Harton very closely and his team, along with the GIS mapping person who's also local meaning Ventura, LA County. So that we've been working with on other mapping, doing overlays over CPUC maps and areas of need. So I'm very much looking forward to this project kicking off. It's been a big waiting time. So happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Maria. And I appreciate that you have been to, all of the meetings that we've held, just even the ones, the kind of the informal meetings with Paso and Atascadero. You've been to our countywide mayor's meeting. I know you went to National Association of Women Business Owners, like you're really getting out there, but that you've been a big support to Atascadero. We greatly appreciate that. So not seeing any questions. Thank you so much. And I'm not seeing anyone else wishing to speak. So I'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to council, ideally for a motion.
I'd be happy to make a
Councilmember
motion.
Funk, please.
Move
I'll
staff's
second.
recommendation.
We've got a motion by Councilmember Funk, a second by Mayor Pro Tem Newsom. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Funk,
Yes.
Councilmember Borbo,
Yes.
Councilmember Daris,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And, I did fail to say, I wanted to thank Director Dunsmore and Kelly Gleason. It was a very frustrating item. You could tell we're all trying to wrangle together things. And I failed to say thank you for helping wrangle us together. And it's not always easy. And we appreciate your assistance with that. So it's been a good night.
Thank you.
All right, we will move on to, we have no management reports. So now council announcements and committee reports. And so this is where we're going to let you know any meetings that we've been attending or any particular things throughout the community that we wanted to let you know about. So I will start with on my right, Councilmember Funk.
Okay. We had a meeting of the Homeless Services Oversight Council last Wednesday. And aside from a host of grant-related business and other things, we're also starting to look to get outcome data that we're looking at as a group. And I thought you might be interested in an update that we had on the Oklahoma Avenue Parking and Village that I also gave in brief to the County Board of Supervisors today. And that's The snapshot, as of the middle of last week, there were 43 households there comprising 64 people. These are all folks who are living in their vehicles in the county supported space. There were 7 slots open that were rapidly being filled off of a referral list that is being kept by Capslo. There are 23 households on the referral list. Not all of them are going to be suitable, but now that's what that process is about. Since they've been, Capslo has been involved at the site since last February. And since they've been doing that and tracking results, 40 households have moved on from the site. 53% of those are considered positive exits, including 16 households that were either reunified with family or otherwise placed into permanent housing. Other positive destinations from there included Medical Detox and 40 Prado. 47% of the households left for what are considered negative or neutral reasons. Those include 8 who were removed or arrested, 8 whose destinations were unknown, and 3 who expired. It's worth noting that the deaths have been discussed by the committee and a couple of them well reported in the public. And it's also worth remembering that people become homeless in all kinds of stages of their life, and the medical supports that are available to folks at that site do include hospice care. And lastly, I'll see that a couple of things. The food banks installed a pantry trailer on the site, and they're working to stock it. That's been a sort of a long process, but they are trying to get those sites that support in. Capslo, which is doing the case management, reported that the housing problem solving for folks on this in the site has actually been pretty complex. And so where positive outcomes were achieved, their experience was this almost always reflect to the work of 5 to 6 different entities teaming together to, as someone's trying to work through a lot of different barriers to getting back into the housed community. And the other exciting news is that the county is moving forward very expeditiously to implement the reorganization that will enable them to carry forward the strategic plan in a much more muscular way. And they're creating the division and have hired Joe Disvonic to be its director. And Joe presented this to this board some months ago. So you've had a chance to at least meet him electronically. That's it for ATSOC.
Thank you. I always sit here and pull up the calendar and go, God, what happened last week and the week before? I know. So city schools meeting, our city schools committee meeting is going to be this Friday. Design review committee with my fellow council member Susan Funk is going to be on Thursday. Last week I attended the column 3C. Nobody knows what that acronym stands for, so I have to look it up. Central Coast Community Energy, the city manager and I went all the way up to Monterey to add our name to the list on the wall during the board meeting to join their organization, which was an honor to fill in for that. And then on Saturday, we celebrated the 35th anniversary of the Elks when we delivered a proclamation. So it's been an eventful week. Looking for an even more eventful week. Thank you.
And I guess we should say that Mayor Pro Tem Newsom is when the half of the seat that Atascadero has. So half of Mayor Pro Tem Newsom will have a seat on that board come 2024. Just one cheek. Yes, there we go. Oh boy, it's past my bedtime and I start saying things that she just whispers into my, into my ethers here. Let's see, Councilmember Corbett.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Newsom mentioned the city schools meeting on Friday, and I have nothing else to report.
That must feel good.
It does feel
Wow,
good.
that's the quickest ever right there. Let's see, air pollution control district meets tomorrow morning. If I can remember, I'll report on what it's about at our next meeting. Capslo met last week. The board approved the pursuit of many grants, lots and lots of money, millions of dollars to run after. And some of that funds hopefully will be used as Councilmember Funk mentioned with Oklahoma Avenue, I think that's what we call it, because it's understaffed and it's a real challenge to keep that organized. I know very little about it. I'm learning it a bit. But that's hopefully where some of the funds will be able to go, because they've got 2 people that they're able to employ for 24 hours, and that's not enough. So anyhow, so that will be coming down the pike. Hopefully we'll be able to get some funds for that. And that's all I have.
Thank you. I will have SLOCOG next week, but a week or 2 ago, we had the countywide mayor's meeting in Paso Robles. And Greg Haas from Congressman Carvajal's office was just talking about a lot of like cybersecurity grants for local government that are becoming available. And so I'm assuming our city manager and folks know about those, but they know about everything. We get told about things, go to staff. Did you know about this? Yeah. Oh yeah, we're already pursuing it. So I thought I'd let my colleagues know, but a lot of cybersecurity grants, a lot of new grant programs that are going to be coming out of both of the federal bills. So, of course, keeping an eye on those things. He did let us know that Congressman Carvajal, come early November, they will be referring constituents for non-emergency issues to the senators. There's only 2 of them. So non-emergency issues will go to the senators. So there could be this 2-month period with that transition between, with the redistricting that happened, that, some people with non-emergency issues might not feel like they're getting addressed, but we will see what happens with that. The other thing that was mentioned, of course, the state passed the 5-year, extension for Diablo. It was noted that they will be applying with the NRC for a 20-year extension, because the NRC is not inclined to do, 5 years, 10 years. So at the end of 5 years, if we can't keep the lights on without Diablo and they wish to go further, they're not going to have to go back to the NRC. So the 20 years is there if it's needed. And there's a robust discussion that went on about whether that will or will not be, but that does not need to take place this evening. So that is the end of my report, and I will ask if there are any individual determinations or actions. There's none in my, all right, great. We are adjourned.